The conference room on Park Avenue smelled like polished wood, expensive leather, and cold betrayal. It was a sterile, unforgiving scent that Lily Hart would remember for the rest of her life. A heavy, silver Montblanc pen rested between her trembling fingers, the cold metal biting into her skin as her lawyer leaned in close, offering a sympathetic but helpless glance. "All you need is your signature," the lawyer whispered, her voice barely carrying over the steady drumming of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Across the glossy mahogany table, her husband, no, her soon-to-be ex-husband, Cole Mercer, leaned casually back in his plush leather executive chair. He looked entirely unbothered, meticulously adjusting the crisp cuff of his bespoke tailored suit as if this were just another mundane corporate acquisition. The diamond-encrusted Rolex on his wrist gleamed under the harsh, recessed ceiling light, its mechanical ticking sounding infinitely louder than Lily's own frantic heartbeat. He didn't look at her, not once. He stared at his phone, his mind already miles away from the life they had built together. Outside, Manhattan was wrapped in a dense, suffocating mist. The iconic lights of Fifth Avenue blurred and distorted by the relentless, driving rain. Lily caught her own reflection in the darkened window pane and barely recognized herself. She looked like a ghost, pale, exhausted, and heavily 6 months pregnant, desperately holding on to the very last shred of dignity she could afford to keep. Cole's voice suddenly cut through the heavy silence of the room, remarkably smooth, but carrying a razor-sharp edge. "Let's keep this clean, Lily. I have a flight to Los Angeles this afternoon." He didn't bother to mention the reason for the trip, but he didn't have to. Everyone in that room, and everyone in the city, already knew. The tabloids had been whispering maliciously about his affair with the famous runway model Sloane Rivers for months, publishing blurry photographs and unnamed insider quotes that had slowly shattered Lily's world piece by piece. Swallowing the thick lump of grief in her throat, Lily pressed the tip of the pen to the heavy parchment paper. Her signature bled into the white expanse like a fresh wound opening. A single, silent tear slipped past her eyelashes and dropped directly onto the wet ink, spreading and blurring into the heavy, finalizing word, divorce. The crisp sound of her lawyer gathering the signed papers and tapping them into a neat stack felt like literal nails being driven into a coffin. Cole rose effortlessly from his chair, sliding his sleek iPhone into his suit pocket with a practiced motion. "Take care of yourself," he said casually, using the exact detached tone someone might use when talking to a passing stranger at a coffee shop. She wanted to scream. She wanted to sweep the heavy glass water pitchers off the table, to demand an explanation for how 7 years of love and loyalty could be erased so easily. Instead, she smiled. It was the kind of hollow, agonizing smile people where when they have lost absolutely everything and know they simply cannot afford to fall apart in front of their enemies. As the heavy oak door shut decisively behind him, she exhaled. It was a shaky, silent, and terribly final breath. The sprawling city outside didn't pause for her broken heart. Yellow taxis honked impatiently, distant police sirens wailed into the gray sky, and millions of lives went on exactly as they had before. But for Lily, time stopped completely right there, trapped in that freezing room full of binding contracts and lingering ghosts. Her lawyer hesitated, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do you need me to call someone for you? A friend? A cab?" Lily shook her head, her gaze fixed on the empty chair Cole had left behind. "No," she murmured softly. "I'll walk." She carefully tucked her copy of the signed documents into her worn leather tote bag, grabbed her older model iPhone with the cracked screen, and stepped out of the massive glass building into the freezing drizzle. The rain tasted metallic on her lips, almost bitter, mixing with the salt of her dried tears. She walked slowly past the glowing, luxurious storefronts of Cartier, Christian Dior, and Tiffany & Company, each glittering window reflecting a pristine, untouchable version of a life that used to be hers. Her cold hand brushed instinctively against the swell of her belly, feeling a faint, sudden kick from within. "We'll be okay," she whispered fiercely to the baby, her voice trembling but determined. "I promise you, I will figure this out." Then, from across the crowded, wet street, blinding flashbulbs suddenly burst through the gray afternoon. A paparazzi photographer darted dangerously through the traffic, shoving a camera into her face and shouting over the noise of the rain, "Mrs. Mercer, is it true he's marrying Sloane Rivers next month?" Lily froze in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The invasive flashes blinded her, disorienting her completely. For the first time, she realized with a sickening drop in her stomach that the divorce wasn't an ending at all. It was merely the cruel beginning of her public humiliation. And the whole world was already watching, eager to consume her pain. The lavish wedding photos hit every social media news feed and gossip blog before Lily had even finished brewing her cheap morning coffee. Cole Mercer, the visionary tech CEO who was supposed to be her forever, and Sloane Rivers, the statuesque runway darling, smiled radiantly beneath a massive, cascading glass chandelier inside the iconic Plaza Hotel. The sycophantic captions read like romantic poetry written for the cruel, unstoppable power couple of the year. Sloane's custom-fitted designer gown shimmered with thousands of hand-stitched Swarovski crystals. Cole's tuxedo was perfectly pressed, his eyes full of intense pride and a sickeningly triumphant joy. They looked exactly like the kind of people the modern world worships, untouchable, perpetually glossy, and profoundly heartless. Miles away from the glittering ballroom, Lily sat alone in her small, cramped, rented room in Queens. She was wearing an oversized, faded gray sweatshirt that barely managed to cover her growing baby bump. The harsh, bluish glow of her old MacBook Air cast a cold, unforgiving light on her pale, tired face. Every tabloid headline she scrolled past felt like a physical slap across the cheek. She tried to turn the screen away, to close the laptop and walk away. But the terrible echo of the photographs had already burned permanently into her mind. Cole's arm wrapped possessively around Sloane's tiny waist, his lips pressed affectionately against her cheek. It was the exact way he used to kiss Lily back when they had nothing. Back when the world still felt safe and full of promises. A sharp, sudden knock on the peeling wooden door broke her depressive trance. It was Maya Brooks, her fiercely loyal former college roommate, who had since evolved into a sharp-tongued, brilliant corporate lawyer. Maya was the one person who utterly refused to let Lily drown in her own silence. Maya bustled into the tiny apartment carrying 2 steaming cups of Starbucks coffee and a greasy brown paper bag from the local bakery. "I brought breakfast," Maya said gently, setting the cups down on the small rickety table. "And the news. I assume you've seen it?" Lily nodded, her voice barely a rough whisper. "He married her the exact same week our divorce papers were legally finalized." Maya exhaled a long, angry breath, pulling a warm bagel from the bag. Classic Cole. He is a narcissist of the highest order. He genuinely thinks this performative cruelty makes him untouchable. But the law doesn't forget so easily, Lily. He still owes you full prenatal medical coverage under the spousal health clause we forced into the agreement. Lily smiled weakly, wrapping her cold hands around the warm coffee cup. He'll find a loophole. He always finds a way to dodge his responsibilities. Then we will find a way to legally corner him, Maya said fiercely, placing the coffee firmly in her hand. Drink this. You need the energy. You are keeping 3 lives alive right now. Lily looked down at her swollen belly, feeling a series of soft, rolling movements under her palm. 3 little heartbeats, entirely depending on her for survival. She desperately wanted to believe in Maya's fierce confidence, to borrow some of her fire. But everything inside her own chest felt hollowed out and utterly defeated. That night, the exhaustion pulled at her bones, but she couldn't sleep. The rain tapped incessantly against the single drafty window of her bedroom, sounding steady, cold, and cruel. Despite knowing it would only hurt her more, she opened her phone again. More pictures from the extravagant wedding flooded her screen. Photos taken in the exact same historic ballroom, where Cole had once held her hands and told her he loved her more than life itself. The anonymous internet comments below the articles were absolutely merciless. "Upgrade achieved," one user wrote. "That poor, dumpy ex-wife must be fuming right now," another chimed in, accompanied by laughing emojis. She quickly locked the phone, turned off the cheap bedside lamp, and sat in the suffocating darkness of the tiny room. Her exhausted mind involuntarily replayed every beautiful memory that had now turned to poison. She remembered how Cole used to lovingly text her from under the table during his boring early board meetings. She remembered how they had excitedly shared late night dollar slice pizza sitting on the bare floor of their very first unfurnished apartment. She had believed in his vision implicitly. She had fiercely defended him against his doubters. And she had physically and emotionally built his entire world from scratch, working 2 grueling jobs just to pay his early business expenses. And now, that exact same glittering, successful world had absolutely no place for her. The next morning, she forced herself out of bed and took the crowded subway to her low-paying, part-time editing job at a small, chaotic media agency in Midtown Manhattan. The office was loud and unforgiving. Her stressed supervisor barely even looked up from his dual monitors when she walked in. "Hey Lily, we need those promotional video cuts finished by tonight, no excuses. Also, HR called down. They want to urgently confirm your maternity leave status and your intended return date." Lily knew the corporate translation all too well. They were actively preparing to replace her the moment she went into labor. During her brief lunch break, she sat on a cold concrete bench outside Rockefeller Plaza, mechanically biting into a cheap, cold deli sandwich. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished glass of the towering building behind her. She saw tired, dark-circled eyes, messy, unwashed hair, and a body that felt simultaneously incredibly fragile and miraculously strong. She put the sandwich down, pulled out a small, frayed notebook from her bag, and clicked a pen. "I will rebuild my life," she wrote, the ink pressing hard into the paper, "even if it kills me to do it." Just as she closed the notebook with a sense of renewed determination, her phone buzzed violently in her pocket. A text message from a blocked, unknown number appeared on the cracked screen. "You should really stop showing up in places where you're clearly not wanted anymore. He's completely moved on to a better life, and so should you." There was no name attached to the message, but Lily didn't need one. The cruel words smelled distinctly of Sloane Rivers. It was highly perfumed, arrogant cruelty, cowardly wrapped in digital ink. Lily stared at the glowing screen for a long moment, feeling a sudden, strange shift in her chest. The paralyzing sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard spark of anger. She deliberately deleted the message and whispered into the cold city air, "You'll see." When she stood up from the bench, the sprawling city around her suddenly felt entirely different. It was colder, sharper, much more dangerous, but undeniably alive. She could almost hear the concrete heart of Manhattan whispering its eternal, brutal challenge to her: fall apart and fade away, or stand up and fight back. As she walked away from the plaza, a massive, digital headline flashed brightly across a towering Times Square billboard above her. Cole Mercer and supermodel Sloane Rivers jet off to the Hamptons for an exclusive, luxury honeymoon. Lily didn't even pause her stride to look up at his smiling face. She just kept walking through the throngs of tourists, her protective hand resting firmly on her belly, her tired eyes fixed entirely forward on the path ahead. Because for the very first time since the divorce, the concept of revenge didn't feel like a toxic, consuming hate. It simply felt like necessary survival. It was terrifyingly close to midnight when the last sputtering city bus rumbled loudly through the slick, wet streets of Manhattan. The legendary city that supposedly never slept had finally turned gray, quiet, and deeply tired, looking remarkably like Lily Hart herself. Her grueling shift at the editing studio had dragged late again due to last-minute revisions, and by the time she finally stepped out into the freezing, relentless rain, the bright neon storefront lights reflected off the deep street puddles like scattered, broken dreams. She clutched her worn leather tote bag tightly to her chest, pulling her thin coat closer as her breath plumed visibly in the freezing night air. 6.5 months pregnant, bone-deep exhausted, and fundamentally alone. She was simply surviving one painful hour at a time. The rattling bus was nearly empty when she boarded. A man dressed in an immaculate, dark, expensive overcoat sat quietly near the back, reading something intently on a glowing iPad screen. An older woman dozed peacefully by the foggy window, her plastic grocery bag resting securely on her lap. Lily sank gratefully into a hard plastic seat near the middle doors, wincing as she leaned down to massage her painfully swollen ankles. She checked her cracked phone screen. There were absolutely no new messages, not even a quick check-in from Maya. Meanwhile, her ex-husband's glamorous wedding still haunted every single news headline on her browser, and every accidental scroll through the internet felt exactly like tearing open a fresh, bleeding wound. She hastily tucked the phone away into her pocket and stared blankly out the rain-streaked window at the glowing, towering skyline, trying to clear her mind. They were halfway across the Queensboro Bridge, suspended high above the dark, churning river, when the heavy bus jerked violently to the side. A massive tire hit a deep, unseen pothole with a bone-jarring crunch, and Lily's entire world tilted terrifyingly for a split second. A sudden, blinding pain tightened viciously in her lower belly, stealing the breath from her lungs. "Oh no," she whispered frantically, gripping the metal bar of the seat in front of her with white knuckles. Cold, terrified sweat immediately dotted her pale forehead. The bus driver glanced in his massive rearview mirror and shouted over the engine noise, "Everything okay back there, miss?" But before she could even formulate a breathless answer, the quiet man in the dark overcoat at the back of the bus had already stood up. He moved incredibly quickly, his demeanor calm but intensely focused. "She needs air," he said, his deep voice slicing through the panic with absolute, unshakable authority. He immediately took off his heavy, dry overcoat and knelt carefully on the dirty floor beside her shaking form. "Breathe, slow and deep. Follow my rhythm," he instructed gently but firmly. "My name is Edward." His tone was highly professional and deeply reassuring, clearly the voice of someone who was very used to taking absolute control of chaotic situations. The anxious driver quickly pulled the large bus over to the curb near a brightly lit, empty gas station. The rain was pouring even harder now, drumming a frantic beat against the metal roof. Edward efficiently opened his large, sturdy umbrella and offered his arm, guiding her out of the bus with extreme care. "You really shouldn't be riding the city transit alone this late at night in your condition," he said softly as they stood waiting for a passing yellow cab under a flickering, buzzing street light. His dark hair was already damp from the blowing mist, a few stray strands falling across his strong forehead. He didn't ask her any intrusive, uncomfortable questions. He didn't stare judgmentally at her cheap, worn-out clothes or her violently trembling hands. He just stood there like a stone pillar, holding the large umbrella entirely over her to keep her dry, willingly letting the freezing rain soak completely through his own expensive suit shoulders. When an available cab finally splashed to a halt beside them, he gently helped her ease into the back seat. "Hospital?" the concerned cab driver asked, looking at her pale face in the mirror. Lily nodded weakly, clutching her stomach. Edward pulled a sleek, minimalist business card from his inner jacket pocket and handed it to her through the open window. "If the emergency room staff gives you any trouble or refuses to admit you immediately, call the personal number on the back of this card. Ask for Dr. Harris at Columbia Medical. He owes me a very large favor." Lily blinked through her haze of pain, deeply confused by this stranger's immense generosity. "Why are you helping me?" she managed to gasp out. Edward hesitated, the harsh street light illuminating a flash of deep, old sorrow in his eyes. "Because I've seen that exact look on someone's face before," he said softly. "The look of someone who is desperately trying to hold the entire world together all by themselves." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "No one should ever have to fight for their life alone at midnight." Before she could even utter a proper thank you, he gently closed the heavy cab door. The pouring rain instantly blurred his handsome face through the glass as the taxi pulled swiftly away from the curb. leaving him standing completely alone in the eerie glow of the street light, coatless, drenched, and profoundly quiet. At the crowded hospital, after hours of terrifying monitoring, Lily was told the severe contractions were stress-induced. It was false labor, the exhausted attending physician explained, but a very, very serious warning sign from her body. The night nurse smiled kindly as she unhooked the fetal monitors. "You desperately need to rest, honey. You need to stop working so hard and find someone to take care of you." Lily nodded numbly, her fingers tightly clutching Edward's business card in her pocket. The sharp edges were already damp and worn from her nervous, sweaty hands. She finally looked down to read the elegant, embossed print under the harsh hospital lights. Edward Langley, Langley Holdings. The name sounded incredibly familiar, like a distant whisper from another, far more elite world. It was a world she honestly thought she had permanently left behind when Cole divorced her. When she finally managed to get a cab back to Queens and unlocked her apartment door near dawn, the sleeping city outside was still wet, gray, and completely silent. She carefully placed the expensive card on her cheap nightstand, right beside her most recent, crinkled ultrasound photo. 3 tiny, fragile heartbeats. 3 absolute, undeniable reasons she had to survive this nightmare. Before finally collapsing into an exhausted sleep, she opened her old, whirring laptop and typed his name into Google. The glowing screen instantly lit up with thousands of articles and breaking headlines. Edward Langley, the brilliant, notoriously reclusive billionaire investment mogul, who had completely disappeared from the public eye after his beloved wife's tragic, sudden death. Lily stared in shock at the high-definition photo on the screen. It was his handsome face, dressed in a sharp tuxedo, standing lovingly beside a breathtakingly beautiful woman who looked like she had been intricately carved from pure sunlight. Her stomach twisted into a complicated knot of awe and sorrow. The mysterious, kind man who had just saved her on the bus tonight wasn't just a wealthy Good Samaritan. He was immensely, globally powerful. And the strange, unpredictable hand of fate had just intricately tied her broken life to his, without either of them truly knowing it yet. The next morning, weak, gray daylight spilled bleakly through the broken plastic blinds of Lily's tiny apartment. The torrential rain had finally stopped, but the sprawling city still smelled heavily of wet concrete, rusted metal, and exhaust fumes. She sat slumped at her small, wobbly kitchen table, mechanically sipping a cup of lukewarm, weak coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, staring blankly at Edward Langley's business card sitting next to the sugar bowl. The name felt utterly surreal, like something wildly improbable pulled straight out of a Hollywood script. She had randomly met a grieving billionaire on a broken-down late-night city bus, and he had treated her with vastly more humanity, respect, and kindness in 10 minutes than her own husband had shown her in their entire final year of marriage. Still, she sternly told herself to snap out of the fantasy and not to think about it anymore. Incredibly wealthy, powerful people like Edward Langley simply didn't belong in her harsh, survival mode world. By 10 o'clock that morning, she was sitting rigidly in the uncomfortable plastic chairs of the crowded waiting room at the local, underfunded community clinic in Queens. The cheap fluorescent lights above her buzzed with an irritating, constant hum, and the stale air smelled strongly of harsh industrial antiseptic and old magazines. She rubbed her swollen belly gently, whispering soothingly under her breath, "Hang in there, my little loves. We're gonna be fine." The exhausted triage nurse finally called her name from a clipboard, and within minutes, Lily was lying flat on the crinkling paper of the cold exam table. Her anxious eyes were fixed completely on the blurry, black and white monitor as the cheerful sonographer moved the cold, slippery wand slowly across her stretched skin. "Everything looks very busy in here today," the woman murmured, a faint, surprised smile touching her lips as she squinted at the screen. "Ms. Hart, did the previous doctors or anyone else confirm with you that you are carrying triplets?" The heavy words hit Lily like a sudden clap of thunder in a silent room. "Triplets?" she gasped, her mouth suddenly going bone dry. She had known, but hearing it confirmed again in this sterile room made the terrifying reality crash down on her all over again. Yes, 3 distinct heartbeats, the nurse said, expertly adjusting the contrast on the screen. See right here? 3 small, rapid flutters pulsed on the monitor like tiny, miraculous, flickering stars in a dark galaxy. You're going to need incredibly close, constant medical monitoring and plenty of absolute bed rest. The nurse continued, her tone shifting to serious professional concern. This kind of multiple pregnancy is automatically classified as extremely high risk. Lily's pulse raced out of control. She was already drowning financially, struggling desperately to pay her basic rent and afford cheap groceries to stay healthy. How on earth was she going to provide for 3 babies growing rapidly inside her? Her hands trembled violently as the sympathetic nurse handed her a massive packet of complex medical forms and a long list of expensive specialists she needed to see immediately. If you feel dizzy, experience sharp pains, or have any spotting, you call 911 immediately, she warned sternly. Stepping outside the clinic, the biting autumn wind whipped mercilessly through her thin, inadequate coat. She stopped by a local chain pharmacy to pick up her prescribed prenatal vitamins. But the crushing humiliation hit her when the cashier read the total. She had to quietly, shamefully ask the clerk to put one of the essential bottles back on the shelf. Her maxed-out credit card had only $27 of available credit left. That evening, Maya dropped by the apartment unannounced, her arms loaded with heavy bags of fresh groceries and a small, brown Amazon delivery box. "Don't ask how I knew you were starving and depressed," Maya said, placing the box carefully on the wobbly table while unpacking fresh fruit and vegetables. "It's a used Kindle I bought online. I loaded it up. Please read something tonight that doesn't break your heart or stress you out." Lily smiled faintly, deeply touched by her friend's fierce loyalty. Inside the cardboard box was the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and the digital file was already bookmarked halfway through. "You highlighted notes all over this thing," Lily said, scrolling through the screen. "Yeah," Maya replied, pouring them both glasses of water. "I desperately needed to read it after my last toxic breakup. But you're going to need its advice a lot more to rebuild your life right now." They ate cheap instant noodles together on the couch while the massive, indifferent city buzzed loudly beyond the thin windows. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, Lily actually felt somewhat normal again, surrounded by the warmth of true friendship. But later that night, long after Maya had gone home, a sudden blinding, sharp pain gripped her lower abdomen with the force of a vice. She gasped loudly, doubling over and spilling her hot tea across the rug. Maya, who had thankfully forgotten her keys and returned to the door, heard the crash and jumped inside. "Hospital. Right now," she ordered, grabbing Lily's coat. The emergency room of the local hospital smelled sharply of bleach, sickness, and palpable fear. Lily was rushed immediately into an active exam bay, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The stern, exhausted ER doctor checked her vital signs, reviewed her charts, and then looked her straight in the eye with no sugarcoating. "You are showing early, dangerous signs of preeclampsia," he stated firmly. "Extremely high blood pressure and severe edema swelling. Any additional stress will absolutely make this condition worse, potentially fatal for you and the babies. You will need constant professional medical supervision, and I am officially prescribing immediate, total bed rest." Lily's throat closed up completely, choking off her air. "I can't afford to stop working," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "I can't afford bed rest." "You cannot afford not to," the doctor said softly but with ultimate finality, pulling the curtain shut to give her privacy. Hours later, the immediate danger had passed, but the reality had set in. Lily sat slumped in a hard plastic chair in the freezing hospital hallway, completely exhausted, holding a terrifying stack of discharge and billing paperwork on her lap. Her cracked phone buzzed angrily in her purse with a new text message from an unknown number. "If you are actually smart, you will stop dragging this pathetic sob story out in the open. Cole is not coming back to save you, so you should just give up and move away. It was Sloane. Again, the sheer audacity of the cruelty was breathtaking. Lily deleted the toxic message, her jaw tightening until her teeth ached. Then, a young triage nurse approached her with a clipboard, looking slightly flustered. MS. Hart, you actually have a visitor waiting for you. Lily frowned deeply in confusion. A visitor? Maya had gone to move the car. Who else could it be? The nurse silently pointed toward the heavy, sliding glass doors of the ER entrance. Standing there, dressed impeccably in a tailored gray suit, his dark hair still slightly rain-soaked from the storm outside, was Edward Langley. In his hands, he held a small, beautiful bouquet of fresh white lilies. They were simple, elegant, and perfectly understated. "How did you even know I was here?" she asked, her voice raspy from crying. As he approached her chair, he smiled faintly, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "You mentioned on the bus that you might desperately need that specific doctor's private number. I figured I would just come down and check to see if you actually had to call it." And just like that, looking into his steady, compassionate eyes, for the very first time in agonizing months, Lily felt the chaotic, terrifying world finally stop violently spinning. A week after her terrifying hospital scare, Lily stubbornly tried to force her life to return to some manageable version of normal. She insisted on working from home for the media agency, sitting for hours editing short promotional videos on her overheating old MacBook Air. She had to pause every few minutes just to catch her breath and ease the throbbing pain in her back. The stern ER doctor had explicitly ordered her to maintain strict bed rest, but her monthly rent was due in days, and her terrible insurance plan simply didn't cover the mounting costs of her specialized care. She desperately promised herself that she would take it slow, just push through and finish one more project, just survive one more week. That crisp Tuesday morning, desperately needing fresh air and feeling a mild bout of cabin fever, she foolishly decided to walk the few blocks to the local grocery store. The autumn air was incredibly sharp and biting, the freezing wind whipping through the streets. Her thin, worn winter coat could barely button over her growing, heavy belly. Inside the grand, marble-floored lobby of a building where she had to drop off a hard drive for a client, she pressed the glowing brass elevator button and waited patiently. The heavy steel doors slid silently open, and her weary heart instantly froze solid in her chest. Standing perfectly posed inside the luxurious elevator cabin was Sloane Rivers. She looked even more impossibly, infuriatingly unreal up close. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, her skin was completely flawless without a pore in sight, and she was draped in a breathtaking, custom designer trench coat that undoubtedly cost far more than Lily's entire yearly apartment rent. Flanking her on either side stood an anxious, heavily burdened stylist carrying several opaque designer garment bags, and a young, frantic personal assistant rapidly scrolling through emails on a gold-plated iPhone. For one agonizing second, the concept of time stalled completely. Sloane's heavily lined eyes flicked lazily over Lily's exhausted face, trailing down deliberately to stare with obvious disdain at her heavily pregnant belly. A cruel, utterly venomous smirk curled slowly across her perfectly painted lips. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with artificial, saccharine sugar. "You're Lily, right? Cole's sad little ex-wife?" Lily nodded silently, her throat too tight to form words, wishing the marble floor would simply open up and swallow her whole. Sloane leaned a fraction closer, invading Lily's personal space, whispering just loud enough for her sycophantic entourage to hear every cruel word. "You're just glowing, honey. I mean, especially for someone who is clearly failing at doing all of this entirely alone." The young, vapid assistant actually chuckled softly under her breath, a sycophantic sound that made Lily's blood boil. The elevator doors began to open again on the ground floor, and Sloane confidently stepped out like royalty, her heavy, suffocating, overwhelmingly expensive perfume trailing behind her in the air like a toxic, invisible poison. "Good luck with all of that, sweetheart," Sloane added over her shoulder, deliberately and loudly tapping her massive, blinding diamond engagement ring against the brass handrail before strutting away toward a waiting town car. Lily stood absolutely frozen in the lobby until the heavy elevator doors finally closed shut. Her pale face burned with a hot, furious shame. The public humiliation stung far deeper and felt infinitely more personal than any sleazy tabloid headline or whispered rumor ever had. She desperately wanted to scream at the top of her lungs, to shatter the pristine glass lobby doors, but instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath. She pressed her cold, trembling hands firmly over her belly, whispering fiercely and protectively to her unborn babies, "Do not listen to her. We are not alone. We have each other." She turned around and walked briskly out of the imposing building, heading straight into the biting wind. Directly across the busy street was a small, unassuming Starbucks. Needing a sanctuary to hide her tears, she quickly ducked inside, mechanically ordered a plain black decaf coffee that she knew she couldn't stomach to finish, and sat heavily at a small, wobbly table right by the rain-streaked window. Outside the glass, the relentless, busy life of the city moved on without her. Men in sharp, expensive suits hurried past, groups of friends shared loud laughter, and colorful umbrellas glided seamlessly down the wet sidewalks. She reached into her bag, pulled out her frayed notebook, and with shaking hands, wrote down a single thought: "Pain does not kill you. It is the fire that teaches you exactly who you really are." Her phone buzzed violently against the table, startling her. It was a rapid text from Maya. "I just got the forwarded copy of your massive hospital bill. Don't panic. I will help cover it for now out of my savings, but please, Lils, you are drowning. You desperately need a miracle right now." Lily read the screen and smiled a hollow, deeply bitter smile. "Yeah," she muttered sarcastically under her breath to the empty coffee cup. "A miracle would be really nice right about now." Just as the thought left her lips, a massive, gleaming, jet-black Mercedes S-Class slowed smoothly to a halt right near the curb outside the window. The tinted back door opened, and a tall, familiar, commanding figure stepped out gracefully onto the wet pavement, holding a brown paper bakery bag and a large black umbrella. It was Edward Langley. He paused on the sidewalk, his sharp eyes scanning the street until he spotted her sitting slumped by the window. He hesitated for only a fraction of a second before pushing open the heavy glass doors and entering the noisy, crowded cafe. "May I?" he asked in his deep, resonant voice, politely pointing to the empty, uncomfortable wooden chair directly across from her. Lily blinked rapidly in pure, unadulterated surprise, quickly wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "What on earth are you doing here in Queens?" "I had a very tedious board meeting nearby," he said smoothly, setting the brown paper bag gently down on the table. "And to be honest, I thought you might really need something much better to eat than stale hospital cafeteria food." He opened the bag. Inside were warm, fresh artisan blueberry muffins and an expensive, insulated cup of soothing herbal chamomile tea. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to cry at the simple kindness, but she proudly tried to protest instead. "You really don't have to keep checking up on me like this, Edward. I'm a stranger." He sat back in his chair, a soft, incredibly genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Maybe I actually want to check on you, Lily." Lily stared across the table at him, completely unsure of what to say or how to react to such pure decency. Edward's eyes weren't the cold, calculating, icy blue typical of the ruthlessly rich men she had known through Cole. They were incredibly warm, deeply steady, and filled with a profound, intelligent curiosity. They were exactly the kind of eyes that made a broken person desperately want to trust the world again. "I unfortunately saw the aggressive spread of your ex-husband's wedding photos online this morning," he added carefully, his tone entirely devoid of pity, filled instead with a quiet, observant respect. The event looked incredibly expensive. Lily let out a short, surprised laugh, the very first genuine, albeit dry and shaky, laugh she had produced in weeks. Yeah, Cole is exceptionally good at buying expensive things to hide his cheap character. Edward tilted his head slightly, his gaze locking intensely onto hers, seeing right through her defensive armor. Then perhaps, Lily, it is finally time you learned how to be exceptionally good at surviving him. When Lily finally looked up from his piercing gaze, the freezing rain had started to fall heavily again, tapping persistently against the cafe windows like thousands of tiny, urgent reminders of the massive, indifferent world outside. She took a slow, calming sip of the warm herbal tea, feeling something entirely unexpected and foreign blossoming in her chest, deep, unshakable calm. Outside the window, splashing through the puddles, Sloane's massive luxury town car sped past in a dark, arrogant blur, kicking up dirty water onto the sidewalk. But this time, watching the car disappear down the street, Lily didn't flinch. She didn't feel small. She just smiled a faint, knowing smile and whispered quietly to the 3 lives inside her, "We're going to be okay." Because in a cold, brutal city that had systematically tried to take absolutely everything from her, a powerful stranger had just effortlessly given her back something entirely priceless. He had given her hope. The heavy, imposing letter arrived via specialized courier on a bleak Tuesday morning. It was securely sealed in thick, expensive ivory parchment paper and deeply embossed with the intimidating, golden logo of Cole Mercer's elite corporate law firm. Lily sat at her tiny kitchen table and stared at the ominous envelope for several agonizing minutes, before finally gathering the courage to tear it open. The very first bolded line on the crisp legal document read exactly like a hostile command: binding non-disclosure and financial settlement agreement. She didn't even need to read the dense, convoluted legal jargon further to know exactly what it meant. Cole wanted absolute, total silence. He wanted her silence. She forced herself to read each highly restrictive clause carefully, her tired eyes blurring with a mix of absolute disgust and sheer disbelief. The cold, calculated offer included a very modest, insulting financial lump sum payout in direct exchange for her complete, permanent confidentiality. If she signed, she could never, ever speak publicly or privately to the press about the grim reality of their marriage, the brutal details of their divorce, or the existence of her high-risk pregnancy. The specific legal words "irrevocable forfeiture of all moral and public claims" jumped aggressively off the page, burning her eyes like spilled acid. At the very bottom of the last page, a stark, empty signature line waited expectantly for her name, dangling the promise of temporary financial relief like a poisoned apple. Her cell phone rang loudly, startling her. It was Maya. "You got the package today too, didn't you?" Maya asked, her voice crackling with barely contained professional rage. Lily's voice trembled as she held the heavy paper. "He's literally trying to buy my permanent silence with pocket change." "Of course he is." Maya snapped furiously over the line. "He's actively getting ready to launch a massive new IPO for his tech company next quarter. Any negative scandal about a pregnant, abandoned ex-wife living in poverty could instantly tank his stock value and sink his reputation with the conservative board members." Lily pressed a shaking hand firmly against her stomach, feeling a sudden, small, reassuring flutter of movement from within. "He's offering just exactly enough money to make me desperately think twice about rejecting it, Maya. It's enough to cover a few months of my rent. Maybe pay off the terrifying stack of hospital medical bills sitting on my counter." "Do not even think about signing that garbage, Lily," Maya said fiercely, her lawyer persona fully activated. "You sign that piece of paper, and he gets to completely rewrite the entire story of your life. He wins the game twice. Once when he cruelly left you to die, and again when you quietly disappear into the shadows for him." But despite Maya's fiery, empowering confidence, she couldn't magically hide the crushing, daily truth of Lily's life. The threatening final notice bills were piling up endlessly on the kitchen counter. Her complicated health insurance claim had been indefinitely delayed due to bureaucratic red tape. She had exactly less than $100 of usable cash left in her checking account. The desperate temptation to just sign the paper, take the meager payout, and survive the winter was absolutely suffocating. That dark, lonely night, she laid the sprawling legal document flat on her scratched kitchen table. The silver pen trembled violently in her exhausted hand as she hovered the tip over the signature line. "Maybe it really is just easier this way," she whispered brokenly to the empty, quiet room, tears streaming hot down her face. "Just take the money. Just end the fight quietly and focus on the babies." Then, exactly as she looked down at the dark line meant for her absolute surrender, her phone buzzed loudly against the wood. A new, glaring text message from an unknown, blocked number lit up the cracked screen. "If you really, truly cared about the future of your babies, you would take the generous deal and stop pathetically embarrassing their successful father in public." Lily froze completely. The entire room seemed to violently tilt on its axis. She didn't need to guess for a single second who had sent the malicious message. Sloane's arrogant, venomous tone was plastered all over it, a sickening, toxic mix of elitist arrogance and deep-seated insecurity, poorly wrapped in the guise of fake, maternal sympathy. Something deep, primal, and incredibly fierce inside Lily's soul finally snapped. The paralyzing fear evaporated, replaced by a roaring, cleansing fire of righteous anger. She grabbed the thick legal document in both hands and ripped it violently in half. Then she stacked the halves and ripped them again and again, tearing the thick parchment until the shredded pieces fell like meaningless, defeated confetti onto the cheap linoleum floor. "He does not get to silence me," she said out loud, her voice ringing clear, strong, and absolute in the empty apartment. "Not this time. Never again." The very next morning, armed with a newfound, terrifying resolve, she marched purposefully into Maya's cluttered office at a small but aggressive boutique law firm downtown. Maya looked up from her computer screen, startled by the fierce, unyielding look in Lily's eyes. "Please tell me you didn't actually sign that trash," Maya said, standing up quickly. Lily dramatically dropped a plastic bag full of the shredded, destroyed pages directly onto Maya's pristine desk. "I didn't sign a damn thing. But I want to take him to court and make absolutely sure he never, ever tries to intimidate or silence me again." Maya smiled a slow, incredibly grim, predatory smile. "That is exactly my girl. We're going to officially file an aggressive motion for full, comprehensive medical coverage under the strict spousal responsibility laws. We will publicly force the family court judge to make him pay every single dime of the hospital and neonatal expenses for all 3 of his biological babies. He will absolutely hate every single humiliating second of it." That very afternoon, operating with ruthless efficiency, they drafted and officially mailed the aggressive legal demands directly to Cole's high-priced corporate attorney. Within a mere 3 hours of the delivery, Lily's phone rang aggressively. This time, the caller ID showed a private, unlisted number. Lily, Cole's voice drawled through the speaker. It was cold, furious, and dripping with extreme condescension. "Do you really, truly want to make this public and ugly?" She inhaled a slow, deep, incredibly calming breath, feeling her own immense power. "You made it incredibly ugly the exact day you walked away from your family, Cole. Do you honestly think a single person in this city will believe a word you say over me?" He sneered viciously, his ego flaring. "You are a literal nobody living in a dump in Queens. I practically own the media in this city. And maybe it's finally time the city saw exactly what a pathetic, gold-digging liar you really are." She calmly pressed the red button and hung up the phone before he could spit out another toxic word. That night, Lily sat cross-legged on her lumpy bed, completely surrounded by towering stacks of unpaid, threatening medical bills and cheap, empty composition notebooks. She felt undeniably terrified of the massive legal war to come, but simultaneously, she felt something entirely new blooming in her chest. Something sharp, brilliant, and incredibly alive. True power. As the freezing winter wind rattled the thin glass of her apartment windows, she rested both hands on her stomach and whispered fiercely to her 3 unborn children. They think I am just a weak, broken woman. They have absolutely no idea what a desperate mother is capable of doing to protect her own. Outside her window, a brilliant flash of lightning and a massive crack of thunder rolled loudly across the glittering Manhattan skyline. For the very first time in her entire life, Lily didn't flinch at the storm. She looked out toward the glowing, arrogant towers of the city. Her eyes narrowed with determination and thought quietly to herself, "Let the war begin." The terrifying night began with a strange, heavy, oppressive stillness. It was the exact kind of eerie, suffocating quiet that makes you feel deep in your bones that something massive is about to violently break. Lily woke suddenly with a gasp at exactly 2:47 a.m. to a deep, radiating, terrible ache low in her belly. At first, she tried to breathe through it, desperately hoping it was just another harmless round of Braxton Hicks' false contractions. She had suffered through dozens of them over the past grueling week. But this time, the pain was entirely different. It came sharper, far more rhythmic, and terrifyingly closer together, gripping her entire body like an iron vice. When she tried to stand up to reach the kitchen for a glass of water, her weak knees instantly buckled beneath her weight. A sudden, massive gush of warm fluid ran heavily down her leg, pooling on the floor. Her breath caught violently in her throat, her eyes going wide with pure, unadulterated panic. "No. No. Please. Not now," she whispered frantically, her hands shaking as she gripped the counter. "Please. Babies. It's too early. Not yet." Outside the window, a torrential rain tapped aggressively against the glass, whispering an urgent, chaotic rhythm perfectly in sync with her racing, panicked heartbeat. She blindly reached for her cell phone on the counter and dialed 911 with slick, trembling fingers. The emergency dispatcher answered immediately, her voice calm and highly trained. "Stay on the line with me, ma'am. Do not try to move. An ambulance is already on the way." But the brutal contractions grew rapidly fiercer, her frail body trembling violently with the sheer, agonizing force of each incoming wave. She collapsed, clutching the sharp edge of the cheap kitchen counter, sobbing quietly and whispering into the empty room, "Please, my beautiful babies, just hold on. Please hold on for Mommy." The sudden, incredibly loud pounding at her apartment door startled her so badly she almost dropped the phone. She painfully dragged her heavy body across the floor to unlock the deadbolt, pulling the door open and freezing in absolute shock. Edward Langley stood breathless in the dark hallway, absolutely drenched in the freezing rain. His usually calm, stoic eyes blown wide with intense, unhidden alarm. "The private night nurse I hired for you called me directly," he said quickly, his voice tight with urgency, not waiting for an invitation. "She said your vitals spiked on the remote monitor and you weren't answering your cell phone. Let's go. Right now." He didn't waste a single second. He immediately scooped her heavy winter coat off the chair and draped it securely over her shaking shoulders, firmly wrapping his strong arm around her waist and half carrying her carefully down the steep, narrow, dangerous apartment stairs. A massive, sleek black SUV was already waiting at the curb outside, its powerful engine running, the hazard lights flashing brightly in the downpour. "Stay with me, Lily. Look at me," he urged intensely as she gasped and cried out through another agonizing, tearing contraction in the back seat. His deep, commanding voice miraculously steadied her racing mind, even as unimaginable physical pain violently split through her entire body. The sprawling city was eerily, beautifully empty at that dark, ungodly hour. The glowing amber streetlights reflected like liquid gold against the slick, flooded pavement as the SUV sped recklessly toward Manhattan. Inside the dim, quiet car, Edward kept his large, warm hand securely wrapped around hers for the entire, terrifying drive. He didn't let go once. "You're going to be absolutely okay," he murmured softly, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on her skin. "I've got you. I promise you. I've got you." When the SUV slammed to a halt at the emergency entrance of Columbia Medical Center, a full, highly prepped team of trauma nurses and doctors rushed out with a gurney to meet them. "Triplets. Severe preeclampsia. Water has fully broken," Edward barked to the lead doctor, his authoritative tone leaving absolutely no room for hesitation or delay. Within frantic minutes, Lily was stripped of her wet clothes and wheeled rapidly down the bright white hallways into a freezing, sterile operating room. Her vision was rapidly blurring at the edges from the sheer, overwhelming pain, immense blood loss, and mind-numbing fear. The very last thing she saw before the heavy anesthesia finally dragged her under and the bright surgical light swallowed her consciousness was Edward Langley. He was standing rigidly by the small observation window in the hallway, his face pale with worry, watching her disappear behind the heavy, swinging double doors. Hours passed like painful, agonizing seconds in the dark void of unconsciousness. When Lily finally drifted awake, her eyelids fluttering open, the recovery world felt incredibly, peacefully silent. Then came the sound. 3 tiny, incredibly faint, beautiful cries echoing from across the room. They were delicate, reedy, and weak, but they were absolutely, undeniably real. "Hot!" Overwhelming tears slipped freely down her pale cheeks before she could even turn her heavy head to see them. The attending NICU nurse noticed her waking and smiled a huge, compassionate smile. "They are very small, but my goodness, they are incredibly strong fighters," the nurse said softly, adjusting Lily's drip. "All 3 of them are currently breathing entirely on their own. It's a miracle." Lily's sore throat closed tightly with immense, crushing gratitude. "Can I please see them?" she croaked. "Very soon," the kind nurse said soothingly, brushing Lily's hair back. "They are currently settling into the NICU for intensive observation. You did beautifully, Mama. You saved their lives." As the nurse stepped away, Edward appeared silently at her bedside. He looked absolutely wrecked. His expensive dress shirt was deeply wrinkled, his dark hair was a chaotic mess, and his eyes were heavily bloodshot from sitting in a hard plastic chair for hours without a single second of sleep. But in his large hands, he gently held 3 tiny, hand-knit hospital caps. One pale pink, one baby blue, and one soft yellow. "They are absolutely perfect. Lily," he whispered, his deep voice thick with unchecked, raw emotion. Lily tried to smile, though her face felt numb. "How did you? Where did you get those?" "I called my sister, Charlotte, early this morning," he said, pulling up a chair and sitting close to her. "She sent them over with a courier. She's also already aggressively organizing a full, round-the-clock postpartum care team for you." She blinked slowly, the heavy painkillers making her mind foggy and confused. "Why? Why would you possibly do all this for me? I'm nobody to you." Edward hesitated, looking down at the tiny knitted caps in his hands, then looked back up, meeting her eyes with a profound, shattering honesty. "Because sometimes, Lily, the universe actually gives you a beautiful second chance at life when you absolutely least expect it. And I am simply not the kind of man who ignores a miracle like that when it's right in front of me." Her weak fingers slowly reached out and brushed against his. Something massive, unspoken, and incredibly heavy passed silently between them in that sterile room. It was a connection that was gentle, electric, and wonderfully, terrifyingly dangerous to her guarded heart. Moments later, a team of specialized nurses carefully wheeled in 3 high-tech incubators. Lily turned her head and stared through the thick, clear glass at the absolute tiniest, most perfect human faces she had ever seen in her life. They looked incredibly fragile, like delicate, breathing porcelain angels. Each tiny baby moved slightly in their sleep, their miniature chests rising and falling, as if they were already stubbornly fighting to stake their permanent claim in this world. "Hi, my beautiful loves," she whispered brokenly, pressing her trembling hand against the warm glass of the nearest incubator. "Mommy is finally here. We made it." Edward stepped closer, standing tall right behind her shoulder, watching her interact with her children with an expression of quiet, profound awe on his face. "They're going to grow up and have your incredible, unshakable strength," he said softly. She shook her head, a tear dropping onto her gown. "No, they will have their very own strength, and it will be infinitely stronger than mine ever was." As the pale, pink dawn slowly bled across the jagged Manhattan skyline outside the hospital window, Lily finally let herself take a deep, full, unburdened breath. All the agonizing physical pain, the crushing loneliness, the brutal public humiliation, it had all led her down a dark, winding path directly here, to this exact moment of fragile, unblemished perfection. And as the morning sun rose higher, casting a warm golden glow over the room, Edward's tall reflection appeared perfectly beside hers in the incubator glass, their faces overlapping in the reflection. Neither of them spoke a single word to ruin the quiet, but they both knew deep in their souls. This wasn't just the tragic end of one difficult life. It was the beautiful, undeniable beginning of an entirely new one. The exhausting, terrifying days immediately after the premature birth blurred quickly into a dizzying, timeless haze of harsh antiseptic light, endless beeping monitors, and sleepless, fearful hours. Lily practically lived in the liminal space between the stressful NICU ward and her own uncomfortable hospital bed. She spent every waking second fiercely watching her three tiny, fighting miracles battle for every single, shallow breath they took. Each delicate baby had a plastic hospital bracelet securely fastened to their minuscule ankles, bearing the beautiful names she had feverishly whispered out loud during the agony of labor: Noah, Grace, and Eli. They were so unimaginably small that she could safely cradle their entire heads in the palm of her single hand. Every sharp, sudden beep of the vital monitors reminded her constantly, brutally, of exactly how fragile human life could be. But she wasn't alone in the vigil. Edward visited the hospital every single day. He was never intrusive, never uninvited, and always carried an aura of absolute, grounding calm. He quietly brought her favorite hot coffee, clean, soft blankets to replace the scratchy hospital ones, and most importantly, he brought silence. It was the good kind of silence, the incredibly rare, comforting kind that made it just a little bit easier for her to remember how to breathe when the panic threatened to overtake her. The hospital nurses definitely seemed to recognize him. Lily often caught them whispering excitedly, "That's Edward Langley, the billionaire," as his tall frame passed the nurse's station. But to Lily, he wasn't the powerful, untouchable billionaire from the sensational tabloids or Forbes magazine covers. He was simply the kind, steadfast man who held heavy umbrellas in the freezing rain, who didn't ask prying, exhausted questions, and who sat quietly and patiently beside her chair when she broke down and cried from sheer, overwhelming terror. One bleak, cloudy afternoon, a stern-looking hospital social worker entered Lily's recovery room carrying a thick clipboard and a deeply concerned expression. "Ms. Hart, we urgently need to discuss your post-discharge living arrangements," the social worker stated in a highly professional, no-nonsense tone. "Given your extremely weakened physical health after the emergency surgery and the incredibly fragile, ongoing medical conditions of the triplets, you will absolutely require full-time, professional assistance at home for at least the next 2 to 3 months." Lily's stomach twisted into a tight, sickening knot of panic. Professional assistance meant money. A vast amount of money that she simply did not have to her name. She desperately tried to force a confident, independent smile. "I'll easily manage on my own," Lily lied smoothly. "I can just work my editing job remotely from my apartment while they sleep." The social worker frowned deeply, clearly not buying the bravado for a second. Ms. Hart, with all due respect, that simply won't be enough. You are actively recovering from a major, traumatic abdominal surgery, and you will be tasked with raising 3 high-needs preemies simultaneously. Going back to a 5th-floor walk-up apartment alone is simply not medically safe for you or the children. We cannot safely discharge them into that environment. When the stern woman finally left the room, Lily sat completely paralyzed, staring blankly out the hospital window, watching thick, white snowflakes drift lazily over the towering Manhattan skyline. She felt hopelessly trapped in a suffocating purgatory between her fierce, independent pride and her absolute, undeniable desperation. That evening, as the winter sun set, Edward appeared in her doorway again, holding a sleek, leather-bound paper folder. "I heard the staff talking about the strict discharge requirements today," he said gently, stepping into the room and pulling up his usual chair. "I would really like to offer you a safe place to stay, at least until the babies are physically strong enough and you are fully healed." She blinked in profound shock, turning away from the window. "What do you mean?" "There is a very large, private guest house located directly on my family's main property on the Upper East Side," Edward explained calmly, his tone strictly logistical, completely removing any pressure. "It's highly private, incredibly quiet, and fully staffed with professionals. You would have immediate, unimpeded access to top-tier medical care for the babies around the clock, without having to lift a finger." Lily frowned, her old defense mechanisms instantly flaring up to protect her pride. "Edward, I cannot possibly accept charity from you. I don't want to be a burden." "It is absolutely not charity, Lily," he said firmly, leaning forward and meeting her fearful gaze with intense sincerity. "It is simply logistics and survival. The daily hospital bills here are incredibly expensive, and I've already taken the liberty of arranging a top neonatal specialist for their ongoing follow-up care. You and the babies would just simply be safer there. That's all that matters." "Why are you continuously doing all this for me?" she whispered, her voice cracking with the sheer weight of his unrelenting generosity. Edward hesitated for a long moment, looking down at his hands. "Because I have been exactly where you are sitting right now," he confessed softly. "I sat in a hospital and watched someone I deeply, desperately love fight a losing battle for her life, while absolutely everyone else in the world just turned away and moved on. I couldn't save my wife, Lily, but maybe this time I can actually help someone else survive." His raw, devastating honesty completely disarmed her defenses. Still, she couldn't entirely shake the deep-seated, terrifying fear of total financial dependency, the exact same toxic, suffocating trap she'd blindly fallen into years ago with Cole. "If I say yes to this," she said slowly, choosing her words with extreme caution, "I need strict rules, very clear, unbreakable ones." Edward nodded immediately, respecting her boundaries without question. "Then we will have ironclad rules." Together, they sat in the quiet, empty hospital cafeteria late that night and verbally outlined the terms of their bizarre arrangement. She would pay him back what she could for rent, whenever she finally could afford it. She would remain entirely, fiercely independent, solely responsible for her own career decisions and parenting choices. There would be absolutely no emotional obligations expected of her, no toxic strings attached, and no blurred, confusing lines between them. When they finally finished negotiating the terms, Edward formally extended his large hand across the table. "Do we have a deal?" Lily took a deep breath, looked him in the eye, and firmly shook his hand. "Deal." 2 days later, a sleek, massive Blacktown car arrived to pick her up from the hospital discharging area. The entire city shimmered beautifully under a thick, pristine blanket of fresh snow as they drove smoothly away from the hospital and toward the hyper-wealthy enclave of the Upper East Side. The sprawling Langley estate appeared through the trees like something pulled straight out of a magical, cinematic dream. It was a massive, highly secure, gated historic townhouse with thick, creeping ivy covering the classic brick walls and warm, inviting, golden light glowing softly through the large, arched windows. Charlotte Langley, Edward's elegant but formidable older sister, greeted her warmly at the heavy oak front door. "Welcome home, Lily," she said kindly, taking her coat. "We've spent the last 2 days preparing the nursery for the little ones." Lily stepped tentatively inside the massive, luxurious guest house and froze in her tracks. 3 beautiful, handcrafted wooden cribs stood perfectly side by side beneath a soft, gently spinning musical mobile. Warm, natural sunlight spilled brightly across the room through sheer, fluttering white curtains. A friendly, highly trained night nurse was already there, efficiently adjusting sterilized formula bottles on a silver tray. It didn't feel cold, clinical, or like a stranger's imposing house at all. It felt like absolute, undeniable safety. That night, long after the 3 babies finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, Lily stood alone at the large bedroom window, looking down at the sprawling, snowy city she once truly thought had utterly destroyed her. Now looking at the distant, twinkling lights, it just glittered again, distant but incredibly beautiful. She whispered a quiet, heartfelt thank you into the cold glass. She wasn't entirely sure if she meant it for Edward, for the chaotic universe, or for the quiet, profound miracle of her simply still standing on her own 2 feet. In another, darker wing of the massive main house across the courtyard, Edward sat silently by his private study window, sipping a mug of bitter black coffee. From across the snowy, moonlit courtyard, he could clearly see her elegant, illuminated silhouette moving gracefully in the warm nursery light. And though neither of them dared to say it out loud yet, both of them deeply knew that something much, much bigger than a simple arrangement had already begun. It all started with a single, intrusive photograph. It was highly grainy, heavily zoomed in, and slightly out of focus. But it was visually powerful enough to set the entire internet on absolute fire in a matter of minutes. The image showed a tall, handsome man in a tailored navy cashmere coat protectively holding a tiny, bundled baby carrier outside the emergency exit of Columbia Medical. The blaring, sensational headline read, "Mystery billionaire seen leaving hospital with unknown woman's child." Within hours of the post going live, relentless gossip sites and amateur internet sleuths had positively identified the mystery man as Edward Langley, the famously reclusive, grieving widower turned ruthless investment mogul, and the mysterious woman walking beside him. Though her pale face was half hidden by a thick winter scarf and the collar of her coat, was very quickly identified too. Lily Hart, the famously discarded, pregnant ex-wife of the flashy tech CEO Cole Mercer. Lily found out about the catastrophic leak the very next morning when she woke up and her cell phone exploded with hundreds of frantic, buzzing messages. Maya had called her first, her voice panicked. "Do not, under any circumstances, check social media today. Do not even open the browser on your phone. The media vultures are actively circling." But human curiosity is a curse, and it was already far too late. A massive, unavoidable flood of vicious, gossipy headlines filled her glowing screen. From divorce papers to a billionaire's arms. Mercer's tragic ex-wife suddenly finds a massive new fortune. The cleverly angled photos made it look exactly as if Edward and Lily were a highly secretive, established romantic couple. Are the babies actually his? One baseless article boldly speculated. One particularly sleazy tabloid outlet even wildly claimed they'd been carrying on a torrid, secret affair long before her divorce from Cole was ever finalized. Her hands shook with fury and humiliation as she read the anonymous, venomous comments below the articles. They were mocking, inherently misogynistic, cruel, and absolutely relentless. Guess she really knows how to land on her feet and find a new wallet. Smart girl. That is a major financial upgrade achieved. It was the exact same crushing, public humiliation she had suffered during the wedding all over again, but this time, it was amplified on a massive, terrifying global scale. Edward came striding into the guest house within the hour of the news breaking. His handsome expression was a mask of stoic calm, but the rigid, furious tension in his square jaw completely betrayed his boiling anger at the invasion of privacy. "I've already aggressively contacted my lead publicist and my legal team," he said, setting his phone down heavily on the marble kitchen table. "We are going to issue a strong, ironclad public statement immediately, clarifying that you are simply under specialized medical care provided legally through my charitable foundation." "I don't want their fake pity," Lily snapped defensively, her voice rising in panic as she paced the room. "I just want them to stop writing lies about me and my children." Edward's deep voice softened considerably, trying to ground her. "Lily, they won't stop. Not yet. The media machine needs fuel. But I promise you, the actual truth will always, eventually outlast the cheap noise." Later that same afternoon, Charlotte joined them in the guest house living room, bringing a soothing pot of Earl Grey tea and her trademark, unshakable quiet authority. "We absolutely cannot let this wild narrative continue to spiral out of control," she said, pouring the tea with steady hands. "We are going to publicly announce to the press that the Langley Foundation is officially sponsoring an elite, comprehensive neonatal care program for at-risk single mothers, and that you are our inaugural recipient." That instantly reframes the entire story. It legally makes you a philanthropic cause, not a sordid, juicy tabloid scandal. Lily frowned deeply, feeling a sudden loss of her agency. "You want to cynically turn me and my babies into a calculated PR press strategy to save face." Charlotte stopped pouring and met her wary gaze with fierce, protective sincerity. "No, Lily. I want to build a titanium wall to protect you, my dear, and to protect those 3 innocent children upstairs. Trust me, I know this world better than anyone. Public sympathy and charitable optics are the strongest armor you can possibly wear in this ruthless city." The official, highly polished PR statement went live to all major news outlets that very evening. The Langley Foundation proudly confirms it is fully supporting Ms. Lily Hart and her premature newborn triplets through our newly launched Comprehensive Maternal Health Initiative. It was impeccably written, highly professional, and fundamentally completely true. Yet, the truth didn't entirely stop the malicious whispers in the social clubs. It only strategically redirected them. Across the city, Cole Mercer saw the breaking news alert pop up on his computer monitor from his sprawling, glass-walled corner office overlooking Central Park. His terrified assistant froze in the doorway when Cole violently slammed his expensive smartphone down onto his mahogany desk, shattering the screen. "She's deliberately playing the pathetic victim for the cameras," he growled, his face twisted in ugly, narcissistic rage. "And that arrogant bastard Langley is happily helping her do it to spite me. Get my entire PR team on a conference call right now. We are absolutely not letting this nobody ex-wife ruin my pristine public image right before the biggest IPO launch of my career." Sloane, lounging lazily on a nearby white leather sofa in a sheer silk robe, smirked coldly over the rim of her mimosa glass. "Well, Cole, darling, maybe she's just significantly better at playing this high society game than you ever gave her credit for. Do not push me right now." "Sloane," he snapped, glaring at her. "Oh, darling," she said sweetly, taking another slow, mocking sip of her expensive champagne. "I really don't have to. You're destroying yourself just fine." Back at the quiet, secure Langley townhouse, Lily tried her best to bottle-feed little Noah, her exhausted hands trembling slightly from the stress of the day's media circus. The gentle night nurse turned on a soft, classical music playlist to help calm the fussy babies. Edward stood silently in the wooden doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, his handsome expression completely unreadable as he watched her. "I never wanted any of this," Lily murmured sadly, not looking up from the baby. "I never wanted to be dragged back into the harsh spotlight again. I just wanted peace." He stepped closer into the dim room, his presence instantly comforting. "You certainly didn't ask for any of it, Lily, but you are the only one who can choose exactly what happens next in your story." Lily looked up, her tired eyes meeting his intense gaze. And what happens if I try to fight back, and I just fail all over again? Edward smiled a faint, incredibly encouraging smile. Then you will simply fail forward, and I will be right here to catch you. That quiet night, she sat alone by the frosted window long after everyone else had gone to bed, aimlessly scrolling through another breaking article on her phone. This one was a highly respected piece from the Wall Street Journal. Langley Foundation's innovative new care program earns widespread praise for financially supporting at-risk single mothers. For the very first time since her messy divorce went public, the anonymous comments below the article weren't vicious or cruel. Someone had thoughtfully written, whoever this woman is, going through a brutal public divorce and raising triplets alone, she must be incredibly, unbelievably strong. Lily closed her eyes, a single, hot tear slipping silently down her cheek. For the very first time in her life, the entire world was publicly talking about her undeniable strength, not her fabricated shame. And somewhere deep down in her soul, she finally knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the tragic end of her story. It was the powerful beginning of her quiet, unstoppable comeback, written beautifully, one defiant headline at a time. Spring finally crept into Manhattan like a long-awaited, collective sigh of relief. The dirty, gray snow had fully melted away, the crisp air smelled faintly of blooming lilac, and the private Langley townhouse garden blossomed brilliantly behind its tall, wrought-iron security gates, looking exactly like a lush, hidden paradise in the middle of the concrete jungle. It had been nearly a full, transformative year since that desperate, freezing first night on the broken-down city bus. A year since Lily's entire life had violently fallen apart and miraculously begun again in the exact same breath. The fragile triplets were absolutely thriving now. They were all chubby, rosy cheeks and infectious giggles filling the once quiet, cavernous house with the joyous music of new life. Lily had officially started working part-time again as a highly sought-after freelance documentary editor, brilliantly balancing the demanding chaos of motherhood and her reclaimed financial independence with quiet, unshakable grace. But undeniably, something profound had changed between her and Edward. It wasn't a sudden, explosive romance. It grew slowly, organically, and inevitably, exactly like the green ivy crawling steadily up the ancient garden walls. Their polite, late-night logistical talks in the kitchen gradually became deep. Breathless laughter over shared morning coffee, and brief, passing glances across the hallway slowly stretched a little too long, charged with electric tension. They never officially crossed the strict, professional lines they had so carefully drawn months ago in the hospital cafeteria, but somehow, over time, those invisible, protective borders had naturally begun to blur and fade away. One sunny, breezy afternoon, Edward stood waiting at the iron garden gate, holding a massive, breathtaking bouquet of pale pink peonies, Lily's absolute favorite flower, a detail he had quietly remembered from a passing conversation months ago. She looked up from typing on her laptop on the patio as he approached, smiling a soft, shy smile. "Those are incredibly dangerous," she teased lightly, closing her laptop. "In my experience, surprise flowers usually mean something major is coming." He laughed softly, a rich, genuine sound that made her heart flutter. "Then I guess I really should have come with a large, bright red warning label." He hesitated for a brief, incredibly vulnerable moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small, elegant velvet box. Inside wasn't a massive, gaudy, flashy diamond the size of a man's ego, like the one Cole had given Sloane. It was a simple, incredibly elegant and quiet platinum band, delicately and purposefully engraved on the inside with 3 tiny initials, N.G.E. "For them," he said softly, his eyes locking onto hers with absolute, unwavering devotion. "And for you, if you will finally let me be a real part of your family." Lily froze completely, her breath catching in her throat. "Edward, I can't. I am absolutely not asking you this because I feel sorry for you, Lily. He interrupted gently but firmly, anticipating her fears. I am asking you because somewhere along this chaotic way, you became my absolute peace. You, and those three beautiful miracles sleeping upstairs. You brought real, vibrant life back into this dark, empty house and back into my dead heart. Her wide eyes filled instantly with hot, happy tears. I don't ever want to be anyone's charity case again. I need to be an equal. He stepped closer, entirely closing the physical distance between them. Then don't be a charity case. Be my fierce, equal partner. On your exact terms. Forever. Lily looked down at the beautiful, meaningful ring, the bright spring sunlight glinting perfectly off the polished metal. She thought deeply of every single, painful, terrifying moment that had magically led her right here, to this sunlit garden. The agonizing divorce, the bus ride, the hospital, the media storms. She looked up into Edward's kind, patient eyes. Yes, she whispered, a tear spilling over. Yes. On our terms. When they officially arrived together at the massive Langley Foundation Spring Gala a month later, the air in the grand lobby literally hummed with excited, gossipy murmurs. Flashing paparazzi cameras erupted like a localized lightning storm as they exited the car. But the highly trained Langley security team expertly kept a respectful, impenetrable distance between the press and the couple. As they stepped arm in arm into the sprawling, gilded ballroom, the loud conversations instantly softened into hushed, awestruck whispers. Lily could physically feel the heavy stares, the intense curiosity. Some of the old money elites still saw a juicy scandal reborn, but many others saw a breathtaking vision of true resilience. Edward guided her smoothly to their VIP table near the stage. Ignore the noise of the room, he whispered lovingly into her ear. You have already survived far worse monsters than them. Across the crowded room, Sloane Rivers stood rigidly near a massive, glowing champagne tower. Her silver, backless designer gown shimmered like chainmail armor, but her aura had significantly dimmed. Her modeling career had taken a massive, public hit recently after several high-profile ad campaigns failed miserably. But she still inherently knew exactly how to command a room's attention. When her cold, calculating gaze finally met Lily's across the floor, her fake smile was constructed entirely of pure venom. Well, 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 if it isn't the new Mrs. Langley, Sloane said loudly when she finally strutted over and approached their table, her voice dripping with artificial, cloying sweetness. Quite the spectacular little comeback story for the tabloids. I must say, Edward, you certainly have a very specific type, poor, brave, broken little women with big, sad eyes. Lily's heart thudded hard in her chest at the insult, but her face remained an absolute mask of perfect, icy calm. You are absolutely right, Sloane, Lily said evenly, her voice carrying clearly to the eavesdropping guests nearby. It takes a massive amount of bravery to completely start over from nothing and rebuild a life. You should really try doing it sometime, instead of just marrying into one. Charlotte's sharp eyes gleamed with immense, unhidden pride from across the table. Sloane blinked rapidly, completely taken aback and visibly flustered by the brutal, elegant shutdown. Before she could formulate a vicious reply, a waiter passed by with a tray, and Lily turned gracefully and dismissively away, engaging Charlotte in conversation as if Sloane had simply ceased to exist. Minutes later, the esteemed host of the gala called Edward up to the main stage to officially present the evening's main award for global humanitarian excellence. He confidently took the microphone and smiled warmly out at the massive audience of elites. This past year, Edward began, his deep voice commanding absolute silence in the cavernous room, I have been profoundly reminded that true, world-changing strength doesn't always roar loudly for the cameras. Sometimes, true strength whispers. It whispers through quiet compassion, through daily courage, and through the agonizing, beautiful work of rebuilding a life entirely from scratch after the whole world cruelly writes you off. He turned his body slightly on the stage, looking out into the crowd and meeting Lily's tear-filled gaze with absolute devotion. And tonight, I want to dedicate this beautiful moment to those rare, incredible people who prove every single day that quiet dignity and unshakable grace are infinitely louder and far more powerful than any fleeting scandal. The entire audience erupted into thunderous, standing applause, and though his eloquent words were technically meant for the philanthropic crowd, absolutely everyone in that room knew exactly who they were truly deeply for. At the crowded press table near the back of the room, a cynical, veteran reporter whispered to a colleague, "She's actually incredibly impressive in person. She is absolutely nothing like what the trashy tabloids said she was." When the lavish event finally ended, Lily stepped out alone onto a high, private balcony overlooking the dark expanse of Central Park. The massive, electric city glittered brilliantly below her, looking endless, terrifying, and wonderfully alive. Edward quietly joined her a moment later, lovingly slipping his warm suit jacket over her bare, shivering shoulders to protect her from the night chill. "Do you have any regrets about tonight?" he asked quietly, standing close behind her. She leaned back against his chest and shook her head slowly. "For the very first time in my entire life, I don't regret a single painful scar I carry. They are the absolute, undeniable proof that I survived the fire and made it here to you." He smiled, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You have beautifully become the calm center in your very own storm, Lily." From the dark street far below the balcony, a lurking photographer with a long telephoto lens caught one final, perfect, candid shot of the night. It was Lily and Edward standing together intimately against the glowing Manhattan skyline, her head resting peacefully on his broad shoulder, the millions of city lights framing them perfectly like a galaxy of stars. By the very next morning, that stunning, romantic photo would spread like wildfire across every major news outlet and social media platform everywhere. But this time, the captions attached to the image were vastly different. From tragic scandal to unshakable strength, the true heart of Manhattan's powerful new power couple. For the very first time, the ruthless, judgmental world wasn't laughing mockingly at her pain. They were giving her a standing ovation. The morning after the triumphant gala, the media headlines were incredibly kind, almost reverent in their praise. Lily Hart Langley, a masterclass in grace under fire. For once in a very long time, the vicious internet wasn't mocking her existence. It was actively celebrating her phenomenal rise from the ashes. But massive, sweeping victories in Lily's complicated life never seemed to come without an accompanying dark shadow following close behind. That specific, terrifying shadow arrived exactly 3 days later, in the unwelcome form of a thick, heavy legal envelope delivered by a specialized, aggressive courier directly to the front door of the Langley townhouse. Edward intercepted the delivery and found Lily upstairs in the sunlit nursery, humming a soft, sweet lullaby as she rocked a sleeping Grace in her arms. "This just came for you via courier," he said, his voice tight, holding the thick envelope out with a deep, worried frown. The embossed corporate letterhead made her stomach violently twist into a cold knot. Mercer and Finch, attorneys at law. She handed the sleeping baby to the nurse, took the envelope, and tore it open. As she quickly scanned the dense legal text, all the color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her chalk white. It was an official, hostile legal petition. Cole Mercer was formally, aggressively filing a lawsuit for partial, unsupervised custody of the triplets. For a terrifying moment, Lily literally couldn't remember how to breathe. The heavy, formal paper trembled violently in her shaking hand like a dry leaf in a hurricane. "He's only doing this to hurt me," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure panic. "He never even asked to see them once. Not a single time since they were born." Edward's jaw tightened so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. "He is absolutely not going to win this, Lily. I won't let him." but Lily deeply, intimately knew the terrifying extent of Cole's reach. She knew his corporate power, his army of ruthless, morally bankrupt lawyers, his bottomless bank accounts, and his psychopathic, endless hunger to completely control the public narrative. He would absolutely use the complex legal system the exact same way he always had in their marriage, like a blunt, heavy weapon to batter her into submission. By noon that day, Maya was pacing fiercely in the Langley dining room, her laptop open. Hundreds of legal papers and highlighters spread chaotically across the massive mahogany table. "This whole thing is just a calculated PR stunt," Maya said, aggressively highlighting a paragraph. "He is desperately trying to stir up public doubt about your character right before his company's massive IPO launches next quarter. If he looks like a reformed, devoted, loving father fighting for his kids in the press, Wall Street investors will trust him more with their money." Lily paced the length of the room, her hands shaking, raw anger making her voice vibrate. "He is literally using our innocent children as disposable PR props to save his failing stock prices." "Yes, he is," Maya replied, her eyes narrowing with predatory legal focus. "And we are going to make him deeply, deeply regret ever filing this motion." They immediately began meticulously building their ironclad defense case. They gathered the hospital admission records proving Cole's absence during her near-death labor, compiled reams of financial documents showing his total neglect of her medical bills, and even recovered archived text messages that definitively proved he had explicitly refused to offer any support when she was starving in Queens. Edward immediately offered the full, terrifying weight of the legendary Langley corporate legal team to crush Cole, but Lily firmly, stubbornly refused the help. "No," she said, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "If we're going to fight him in court, we do it as me, just Lily, not as your billionaire wife. I absolutely will not let him twist this narrative in the press into another rich versus poor, David and Goliath circus where he gets to play the victim." The very first, highly anticipated custody hearing was held in a quiet, heavily guarded Manhattan courtroom. Cole arrived flanked by an army of slick lawyers and Sloan, who was deliberately dressed down in conservative, designer gray, feigning a look of somber, maternal humility for the cameras outside. Cole looked incredibly smug, effortlessly charming, exactly the picture-perfect misunderstood man he wanted the swarming media to see. When Lily bravely took the witness stand, he actually smirked slightly at her from his table. Looking exactly like an arrogant man watching a boring movie he thought he already knew the ending to. But when Maya finally stood up and began methodically, ruthlessly presenting their mountain of hard evidence, his polished, arrogant confidence audibly cracked. Maya calmly displayed blown-up, time-stamped emails proving Cole's complete, intentional lack of contact during Lily's high-risk, terrifying pregnancy. She presented undeniable, documented proof of thousands of dollars in unpaid, ignored medical bills. And then most damning of all, she played a crystal-clear audio recording of a vicious voicemail he had drunkenly left on Lily's phone months ago in a fit of rage. "You think those 3 parasite kids are going to magically change anything between us? They're your massive problem now. Lily, not mine. Don't ever call me again." The packed, tense courtroom went dead, horrifyingly silent. Cole's panicked lead attorney jumped up to shout objection, but the catastrophic damage was already permanently done. Lily's hands shook as she gripped the wooden railing of the witness stand, but her voice remained clear, strong, and unwavering as she addressed the room. "He wasn't there when they were born prematurely. He didn't even care enough to know their names. And now, only after the world finally starts to respect me again, he magically remembers he's a father? No, Your Honor, he doesn't remember he has children. He just remembers he has an IPO and a public image to save." The stern, experienced judge looked down at Cole over the rim of his reading glasses, his judicial expression entirely unreadable but heavily intimidating. "Mr. Mercer, based on the overwhelming evidence presented, it appears your sudden petition for custody utterly lacks any factual or moral merit. The court will fully maintain sole physical and legal custody with the mother, with extremely limited, court-supervised visitation rights pending a further, rigorous review of your conduct. Cole's handsome face reddened with explosive, humiliated fury. Sloane leaned aggressively toward him, her perfect facade breaking as she whispered furiously, "You explicitly promised me this PR stunt would work." Outside the grand steps of the courthouse, a massive swarm of reporters waited like hungry wolves. Blinding flashbulbs assaulted Lily as Maya expertly led her through the chaotic, shouting crowd. Someone shoved a microphone forward and shouted aggressively, "Mrs. Langley, are you maliciously keeping these children from seeing their biological father out of spite?" Lily stopped dead in her tracks, turned smoothly, and met the bank of television cameras head-on, her gaze piercing and fearless. "I am not keeping them from their father. I am fiercely protecting them from the monster their father became." That specific, powerful soundbite would replay endlessly for days across every single major news network in the country. It was the undeniable, roaring sound of a strong woman absolutely refusing to ever be a silent victim anymore. Back in the safety of their waiting car, Edward reached over the center console and took her shaking hand in his warm grasp. "You were absolutely extraordinary in there today," he said softly, awe in his voice. She smiled faintly, the massive adrenaline crash bringing deep exhaustion pulling at the corners of her eyes. "No, I was just really tired of always losing to him." As their car drove smoothly away from the curb, Cole watched furiously from the high courthouse steps, boiling, impotent fury simmering hotly behind his carefully polished public mask. Sloane angrily slipped her arm through his to keep up appearances for the lingering cameras, but he barely even noticed her touch. Because for the very first time in his charmed, arrogant life, he realized something deeply, existentially chilling. The quiet, obedient woman he had once callously left behind to die wasn't broken anymore. She was incredibly, lethally dangerous to him. 2 peaceful, quiet months after the explosive custody hearing, the entire world finally seemed to have stopped violently spinning against her. Lily was actively, joyfully rebuilding her life, one small, beautiful victory at a time. The triplets were growing rapidly, filling the house with chaos and light. Noah was the first to laugh out loud, a deep, belly chuckle that melted everyone's heart. Grace had stubbornly learned how to reach out and grab fistfuls of her mother's dark hair, refusing to let go. And Eli, the smallest, had developed a demanding cry loud enough to wake the entire Upper East Side. The sprawling Langley townhouse no longer felt to Lily like borrowed, intimidating space belonging to a billionaire. It finally truly felt like her own home. She happily spent her quiet mornings editing short, impactful documentaries for a local independent film studio, working comfortably from her absolute favorite, sun-drenched corner near the large bay window. Edward often casually passed by her workspace, a mug of fresh coffee in his hand, terribly pretending he wasn't just finding excuses to check on her and see her smile. Their love was incredibly steady now. It was a quiet, deep, and heavily rooted connection, like something durable and real earned through surviving massive storms. Not a fragile thing built quickly on shiny, shallow illusions. One bright afternoon, while Lily was sitting on the floor feeding the babies, Charlotte entered the room carrying a thick, expensive-looking letter heavily embossed with shiny gold foil. "This just came for you by messenger," she said, handing it over with a curious smile. "It's an official invitation from the highly exclusive Fifth Avenue Gallery." Lily frowned in confusion, wiping a drop of spilled baby formula from her comfortable sweater sleeve. "An art gallery? I'm exactly not high art world material, Charlotte. Must be a mistake." Charlotte smiled wider, a knowing look in her eyes. "It's absolutely not a mistake, and it's not just about art. They're hosting a massive, high-profile charity exhibit next month titled Mothers of Resilience. It features stunning portrait photographs and short documentary films about extraordinary women who rebuilt their lives from tragedy. They officially want to feature you as their centerpiece. Lily froze, the baby bottle hovering midair. Me? Why on earth would they want me? Because your true story finally reached them, Charlotte said softly, sitting beside her on the rug. Someone from the Wall Street Journal editorial board sent the gallery curators that viral video. Clip from the courthouse steps. The one where you fiercely said you were protecting your children from what their father became. The clip went massively viral. It resonated with millions of women globally. Lily set down the plastic bottle, her heart pounding with a sudden, overwhelming anxiety. I didn't say that to the cameras for fame or attention, Charlotte. I know you didn't, Charlotte replied gently, placing a hand on her knee. And that is exactly why the entire world believes you, and why they want to honor you. A week later, the highly anticipated exhibit opened to a packed house, complete with clinking champagne glasses, soft jazz, and the relentless flash of society cameras. The massive, pristine gallery smelled beautifully of fresh white lilies and expensive new oil paint. Large, stunning, black and white photographs of incredible women lined the high walls. Brilliant trauma doctors, brave military soldiers, cancer survivors. Right in the dead center of the main room, bathed in a soft, warm spotlight, stood a single, massive, beautifully framed, candid photograph of Lily gently holding her sleeping triplets. It had been taken secretly and lovingly by Charlotte one quiet, sunlit morning in the nursery. The simple, powerful brass plaque beneath the portrait read, "Strength is not simply inherited. It is painstakingly rebuilt." Lily stood quietly at the very edge of the bustling crowd, feeling highly uncomfortable and incredibly exposed under the intense public attention. Edward approached her through the crowd, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored navy suit, his demeanor immensely proud but respectfully understated. "You absolutely belong here. In this room. With these women," he said gently, wrapping an arm around her waist. "It really doesn't feel like it," she admitted, looking down at her shoes. "I'm just a normal mom who miraculously survived some really bad luck and a terrible man." He smiled, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "No, Lily, you are a powerful story that a lot of broken people desperately needed to believe in to keep going." The elegant evening unfolded beautifully, filled with heartfelt conversations and genuine praise, until a highly familiar, grating voice sliced sharply through the soft, ambient background music. Well, if this isn't just incredibly, sickeningly poetic." Lily turned slowly to see Sloane Rivers gliding aggressively toward her through the crowd. Sloane was poured into a revealing, backless silver designer dress, ironically, the exact same luxury brand that had recently publicly dropped her as a sponsor after her failed, highly criticized ad campaign. "You look very different," Sloane said, her tone feigning fake, condescending kindness. "I suppose marrying into billionaire success really suits you, doesn't it?" "Sloane," Lily said calmly, refusing to take the obvious bait, "you are currently a guest at a charity event honoring resilient mothers. Try very hard not to turn this room into your personal, desperate runway." Sloane's fake, painted smile tightened into a furious grimace. "Do you really honestly think this fake new saintly image will magically erase your pathetic, trashy past? You and I both know the vicious press loves nothing more than a good, spectacular fall from grace. Your time is coming." Before Lily could even formulate a classy response, a soft, distinct mechanical click echoed loudly nearby. Several hungry reporters had quickly turned their large cameras and microphones toward the brewing confrontation, sensing drama. Edward stepped smoothly and immediately forward, placing himself between Lily and Sloane, his massive, intimidating presence instantly commanding the entire room's attention. "Is there a problem here that requires security?" Edward asked, his voice low, freezing, and lethal. Sloane's aggressive, toxic bravado instantly faltered under the weight of a true billionaire's glare. "No, just," Just warmly congratulating your new wife on her little picture." "Good," Edward said coolly, his eyes dead flat. "Then consider your congratulations formally delivered. Now, leave." Sloane turned on her heel and fled the room, but the tense atmosphere had been broken, and the malicious damage lingered in the air. That night, lying in bed, Lily scrolled obsessively through her phone, reading the new, sensationalized headlines that had already popped up. Mercer's ex and his new wife's bitter rival face off at elite Fifth Avenue gala. The toxic, exhausting media cycle was starting all over again. But this time, something fundamental inside Lily had permanently changed. Instead of feeling crushing, suffocating panic, she felt absolute, crystalline clarity. She picked up her phone and called Ben Walker, her old, trusted mentor in the television industry. "Ben," she said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty, "I want to make something new. Not a vanity piece about me. I want to make a documentary about all the unseen women who were brutally silenced, publicly shamed, or grossly underestimated by powerful men. A real, gritty documentary. Honest, unflinching, and raw." Ben's voice smiled warmly through the phone speaker. "Are you finally ready to tell your own story to the world, Lily?" "No," she said firmly, looking out at the city lights. "I'm finally ready to tell ours." When she hung up the phone, she felt incredibly, physically lighter. For the very first time in years. She wasn't exhausting herself by constantly running away from the blazing headlines. She was finally taking the pen and rewriting them herself. And somewhere deep in a sterile, lonely penthouse overlooking the city, Cole Mercer sat in the dark and watched the exact same trending news story. His discarded ex-wife's radiant face glowing brightly on every single flat screen in his home. He poured himself another heavy glass of scotch, his miserable reflection warping grotesquely in the expensive crystal glass. Because for the very first time in his arrogant life, he realized with absolute dread that it wasn't her reputation burning to the ground in the public square. It was his. The crisp morning after the gallery event, Manhattan buzzed loudly with fresh, swirling rumors. Lily's striking, candid photo from the exhibit had gone massively viral all over again. This time, it wasn't just shared by gossip blogs, but by highly respected top-tier business magazines, universally praising her as a modern symbol of female integrity and maternal resilience. That single, powerful image made her infinitely more visible and famous than she had ever been. But visibility in a cutthroat city entirely built on ruthless power dynamics always came with hidden, lurking danger. At the towering, glass and steel Langley Holdings headquarters on Park Avenue, Edward sat rigidly at the head of a massive mahogany table in a highly tense, high-stakes board meeting. The heated discussion was focused entirely on a major, multi-billion-dollar acquisition deal, a complex series of high-profile commercial real estate properties currently led by a shadowy investment firm directly linked to Cole Mercer Enterprises. Edward's razor-sharp business instincts prickled uncomfortably at the back of his neck. He fundamentally did not trust convenient coincidences, especially not when they came waltzing into his boardroom wearing expensive, tailored Italian suits and slick smiles. Charlotte, acting as his chief strategy officer, leaned over to whisper discreetly in his ear. "Cole's frantic PR people have been aggressively sniffing around our major investors all week. He's desperately trying to legally attach his failing name to this specific Langley deal to rebuild his shattered public reputation and save his IPO." Edward nodded grimly, his eyes narrowing at the financial projections on the screen. "Then we need to aggressively cut him out of the contract like a cancer before he permanently poisons the entire room and drags our stock down with him." Across the wide table, the overconfident lead corporate negotiator proudly projected a digital file onto the massive screen. "Preliminary funding models show incredibly positive, record-breaking numbers," the negotiator said brightly. "Cole Mercer's tech subsidiary, Ardent Solutions, is actively offering to provide the entire digital infrastructure support for Phase 2 of the build at a massive discount. Their PR team claims a joint venture will be incredible for both of our public images. A clean, highly sustainable, modern redevelopment project. Edward's deep, authoritative voice sliced effortlessly through the excited buzz of the room, silencing the executives instantly. A good public image is incredibly cheap to buy. I want a forensic, deep dive due diligence report on every single one of his shell companies by lunch. By exactly noon, a thick, damning report landed with a heavy thud on Edward's pristine desk. It contained hundreds of pages of glaring, undeniable red flags deliberately hidden behind complex layers of offshore shell companies and dummy LLCs. Cole's dirty, desperate fingerprints were absolutely everywhere in the documents. There were massively fake, inflated corporate valuations, illegal insider loans to family members, and a highly suspicious, unregulated offshore slush fund holding millions. This wasn't a legitimate business partnership at all. It was an elaborate, desperate financial trap designed to save Cole's sinking ship by tying it to the unsinkable Langley dreadnought. Edward picked up his phone and called Maya immediately. "I need you and Lily to come down to my office right now," he said, his tone urgent and grim. "You both really need to see what I just found." When Lily finally arrived at the executive suite, the breathtaking city skyline gleamed brightly behind the massive glass walls. Edward laid out the damning financial documents across his large desk. He's actively trying to use the pristine Langley corporate name to illegally launder his massive hidden debts, Edward explained, pointing to the spreadsheets. If this fraudulent deal actually goes public and the SEC gets involved, it won't just hurt me and my board financially. It will maliciously drag your name and your new reputation right back through the mud again. Lily's face went completely pale as she stared at the papers. He deliberately planned all of this. The nasty confrontation at the gallery, the fake charity donations, everything. It was all just calculated bait to force a public association with us. Maya expertly scanned the legal pages, her sharp eyes narrowing like a hawk locking onto its prey. Cole always plays two dirty games at once. He must have anonymously leaked the Fifth Avenue Gallery confrontation to the press himself to set the chaotic stage. He wanted to publicly paint you as petty and unstable right before this massive deal inevitably collapsed. That way, when the bloodthirsty media comes looking for someone to blame for the financial ruin, the blood will spill directly on you and Edward both, leaving him as the innocent victim. Lily gripped the hard edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white, her voice dropping to a fierce, terrifying whisper. "Not this time. We're going to hit him first, and we are going to hit him hard." Maya smirked. A dangerous, brilliant legal mind at work. That is exactly what I was thinking. They spent the next 6 hours locked in the office, brilliantly building their devastating counterattack. They crafted a highly coordinated, airtight press release, compiled certified financial audits of Cole's fraud, and orchestrated a quiet, undeniable leak of the offshore accounts to a highly trusted, Pulitzer-winning financial journalist at the Times. The damning evidence of Cole's massive fraud would beautifully appear as if it came directly from a brave whistleblower within his own corrupt company. That evening, Edward attended the final, lavish investor dinner at the exclusive River Cafe, located right on the water overlooking the glowing Brooklyn Bridge. The elegant restaurant shimmered brightly with expensive crystal chandeliers and the low, polite whispers of old, generational money. Cole Mercer was already there, holding court, oozing fake charm and false confidence, casually sipping an expensive whiskey beside several potential, billionaire investors. "Edward," Cole said, approaching with a wide smile that was far too smooth to ever trust. "I was really hoping our paths would cross tonight. I hear your new wife is quite the rising media star lately." Edward's stoic expression didn't change a single fraction of an inch. "That's funny, Cole, because I just heard that you are about to become a rather massive, unforgettable headline yourself." Cole's arrogant smirk faltered slightly in confusion. Right then, his cell phone buzzed violently in his suit pocket. A massive wave of frantic notifications suddenly lit up his bright screen. Urgent emails from his lawyers, panicked text alerts from his board, and breaking news banners from every major financial app. The Wall Street Journal breaking headline glared up at him in bold, black letters. Mercer Enterprises CEO under federal investigation for massive financial misconduct and offshore fraud. All the color instantly drained from Cole's face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. The wealthy investors standing around him began whispering furiously, checking their own phones and physically stepping away from him as if he were suddenly contagious. Paparazzi cameras waiting outside the restaurant suddenly flashed blindingly through the windows. Edward leaned closer, his deep voice low, freezing, and absolutely lethal. You built your entire pathetic empire on the backs of lies and stolen money. Cole, consider this your formal, permanent eviction notice from my city. By the time Edward finally returned home to the townhouse, Lily was waiting up for him in the quiet living room, the babies fast asleep upstairs in the nursery. She looked at him from the couch with a quiet, fierce pride burning in her eyes. Did it work? He exhausted loosened his silk tie, exhaling a long, satisfied breath. He's completely finished, Lily. The SEC is already raiding his offices. Lily nodded slowly, a small, genuine, beautiful smile forming on her lips. Then that is finally one less dark shadow hanging over our family. Edward walked over, sat beside her, and gently brushed a stray strand of dark hair from her beautiful face. No, he said softly, kissing her forehead. It is your brilliant light that finally burned his shadow down to the ground. Across the dark, churning river, Cole Mercer stood entirely alone, staring blankly out from his cold penthouse window. The glittering, massive Manhattan skyline reflected brightly in the thick glass, bright, merciless, and completely, utterly indifferent to his existence. His fake, stolen empire was rapidly crumbling to dust around him, and this time, there was absolutely no one left in the world to blame but himself. The Langley Foundation's highly anticipated annual charity gala at the historic Plaza Hotel was supposed to be a grand celebration of global progress, an evening of refined elegance and immense gratitude. The sprawling, legendary ballroom shimmered brilliantly under massive, cascading crystal chandeliers. Talented string quartets played sweeping violins over the polite hum of wealthy conversation, and the intoxicating scent of thousands of fresh, pink peonies filled the warm air. For Lily, walking through those doors was a profound, surreal, full-circle moment. This exact ballroom was the very place where her cruel ex-husband had publicly, humiliatingly married Sloane Rivers while she sat starving in Queens. Now she was returning to the exact scene of the crime, not as a pathetic, discarded scandal, but as the powerful, radiant woman absolutely everyone in the city wanted to meet. She arrived proudly on Edward's strong arm, wearing a breathtaking, custom-designed deep emerald gown that flowed like water. Her dark hair was swept elegantly into soft, classic waves. The paparazzi flashbulbs erupted like a barrage of fireworks as they gracefully stepped out of their town car onto the red carpet. "Mrs. Langley, over here, please," the frantic photographers called out, desperate for a shot. She smiled warmly for the cameras, looking graceful but incredibly calm, knowing with absolute certainty that every single frame captured tonight would finally tell the world exactly who she had truly become. Inside the ballroom, the city's financial and social elite swirled through rivers of vintage champagne and hushed, excited gossip. Awestruck whispers followed her everywhere she walked, a potent mix of deep admiration mixed with a tiny bit of high society envy. "That's her," one older, diamond-draped woman murmured to her husband as Lily passed. "The brilliant girl who somehow turned a massive, humiliating scandal into an absolute empire." Lily felt incredibly steady, grounded, and entirely untouchable in Edward's presence, until a highly familiar, grating voice slid sharply through the ambient noise like a drop of liquid poison. Well, if it isn't Manhattan's favorite little fabricated miracle." Sloane Rivers suddenly appeared from the crowd, her tight, backless silver dress clinging to her frail frame like a second skin. A half-empty flute of champagne trembling slightly in her hand. Her painted smile was absolutely flawless for the cameras, but her eyes were deadly and wild with desperation. "You really have come a very long way from that dump in Queens, haven't you?" Sloane said sweetly, her voice dripping with venom. "Tell me, Lily, do you ever miss just being poor and ordinary?" Lily's red lips curved into a cool, utterly unbothered smile. "No, Sloane, but I do occasionally miss the peaceful days when toxic, shallow people like you didn't matter to me at all." Loud, shocked gasps rippled through the small circle of elites standing around them. Sloane's heavily contoured face hardened into an ugly sneer. "Careful, darling," she hissed, stepping closer. "I helped build this high society world long before you ever managed to scam your way into it." "Then maybe it's finally time someone with actual taste remodeled it," Lily replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. Before the furious Sloane could formulate a response, a deeper, much darker voice cut aggressively through the rising tension. "Ladies," Cole Mercer said as he stepped out of the shadows, looking unnervingly, artificially composed in a stark black tuxedo. "Still making embarrassing public scenes, I see." Lily turned slowly to face him, her pulse quickening slightly, but she held her ground. "What on earth are you doing here, Cole? You are currently under federal investigation." "I was formally invited," he lied smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Unlike some low-class people in this room, I still have incredibly powerful connections in this city." His arrogant, condescending smirk was the exact same one that used to reliably make her stomach twist into painful knots of anxiety. Only now, looking at him, it just filled her with a profound, overwhelming sense of disgust and pity. Hotel security should really be much more selective about letting felons through the door, Edward said, suddenly appearing right at her side, his massive presence forming an impenetrable wall of calm, lethal power between Lily and Cole. Cole ignored Edward entirely, focusing his manic energy on Lily. "Relax, Langley. I just wanted to come over and congratulate the happy, fake couple. It's quite the incredible PR story arc you two have spun. From my pathetic, discarded ex-wife to a billionaire's shiny new bride. Maybe I should actually thank you, Edward, for polishing up the garbage I left behind." The vile, misogynistic words hit the surrounding crowd like a physical slap across the face. The entire section of the ballroom went dead, horrifyingly silent. People stopped breathing. Lily didn't cry. She didn't shrink. She took a slow, steadying breath and stepped boldly forward, closing the distance between her and the man who had tried to destroy her. "You should really be thanking me for surviving you, Cole," she said, her voice ringing with absolute, terrifying clarity. Without breaking eye contact, she reached calmly into her elegant emerald clutch purse and pulled out a small, folded white envelope. "Do you happen to remember these?" she asked, pulling out a stack of folded photocopies and holding them up for him to see. They were highly confidential legal documents, old, hidden financial ledgers, and absolute, undeniable proof of Cole's fraudulent offshore shell companies. "You sloppily forged these documents during the last year of our marriage, hiding them in the Home Office. I found them, and I kept them safely hidden," Lily said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "The SEC federal investigators currently have the originals in their possession as of this morning." Cole's arrogant, practiced smile faltered for the very first time, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. "You're bluffing. You're a liar." "Am I?" Lily asked softly, tilting her head. "Or maybe, Cole, you've just finally run out of lies to tell the world." Massive gasps echoed through the wealthy crowd. Sloane physically stepped back away from Cole in horror, her panicked eyes darting wildly between the documents and the surrounding cameras. Edward didn't move a single muscle, simply standing tall and proudly watching as Lily masterfully reclaimed the stage and the power that had once been violently stolen from her. Cole's arrogant mask completely, finally cracked into a million irrecoverable pieces. "You will absolutely regret this," he hissed, his fists clenching at his sides. Lily met his furious, pathetic glare with calm, inextinguishable fire. "No, Cole. I already spent years regretting things. Now it's finally your turn." He started to step forward to speak, to yell, to defend himself. But Sloane suddenly turned her back on him, facing the murmuring crowd, her voice trembling with sheer panic and self-preservation. "He lied to me. He told me all those offshore accounts were perfectly clean. I didn't know anything about the fraud." The waiting photographers pounced like starving wolves. The blinding flashbulbs went off in a chaotic frenzy again. Brighter, harsher, unforgiving. Within seconds, the powerful man who once haughtily demanded all of Manhattan's absolute loyalty was violently cornered, caught helplessly between the brilliant woman he had cruelly betrayed and the shallow one who had instantly, publicly abandoned him to save her own skin. Lily turned gracefully to Edward, her hand perfectly steady as she placed it in his. "Let's go home, darling." As they walked proudly out of the ballroom together, the frantic reporters shouted questions, desperate for a quote. The flashing cameras chased them down the red carpet like frantic moths drawn to a brilliant light, but Lily didn't look back over her shoulder. Not even once. Outside the hotel doors, the sprawling city glittered beautifully against the pitch-black night sky. Edward squeezed her hand tightly, lifting it to his lips. "You just ended him," he whispered, awe and deep respect in his voice. She exhaled slowly, the crisp night air tasting sharp, sweet, and heavy with ultimate victory. "No," she said softly, looking up at the stars. "He ended himself. I just finally handed him the mirror." And right behind them, inside the gilded, golden ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, amidst the shouting press and the crying models, the vast, corrupt empire of Cole Mercer finally, permanently began to crumble into dust. The catastrophic fallout from the explosive Plaza confrontation hit Manhattan elite circles like a Category 5 thunderstorm. Overnight, absolutely every major global newspaper and financial blog carried the sensational story. Cole Mercer faces severe federal fraud allegations after explosive public clash with Billionaire's wife at elite charity gala. The stunning, high-definition photo of Lily standing incredibly tall, elegant, and fearless, holding the damning envelope of evidence right in her ex-husband's terrified face, made the front page of the New York Times. For the very first time in her life, she wasn't the tragic, whispered-about scandal. She was the absolute hero of the story. 2 days later, however, a process server courier arrived at the iron gates of the Langley townhouse carrying another heavy, formal envelope. This one bore the intimidating, official blue seal of the New York Supreme Court. Edward opened and read the legal filing first, his handsome expression instantly hardening into cold, furious granite. "He's officially suing you," Edward said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "for massive, multi-million-dollar defamation." Lily's stomach dropped out from under her. "Defamation? How is that even possible? He actually committed the fraud. We gave them the real proof. He's legally claiming that you expertly fabricated the evidence out of spite to maliciously destroy his business and ruin his IPO," Edward said, his jaw clenched tight with rage. "He's making one last, desperate, dying play to make you look like the crazy, vindictive villain to a jury." For a terrible, fleeting moment, the old, paralyzing fear crept right back into her chest. It was the exact same crushing helplessness she had felt during the darkest days of her divorce, when Cole's expensive, slick lawyers had easily painted her to the judge as an unstable, greedy, hysterical woman. But this time, she wasn't sitting alone in a freezing apartment in Queens. Maya arrived at the townhouse within the hour, her sharp designer heels clicking aggressively like a war drum against the marble floor. Her yellow legal pad was already filled with pages of aggressive, brilliant counter-strategy notes. We hit him right between the eyes with the absolute truth at that gala, Maya said fiercely, throwing her briefcase onto the table. We have the real, original documents, the digital timestamps, the offshore routing numbers, and the federal witnesses. You want a total war? Lils, let's give this arrogant bastard a war he will never forget. The next few grueling weeks blurred into an exhausting marathon of endless strategy meetings. Late-night conference calls with federal prosecutors and brutal, hours-long legal depositions. The hungry tabloids aggressively churned out sensational stories daily. Some of them were true, but most were wildly twisted for clicks. Langley wife fights back in court. Ex-lover's vicious revenge or righteous financial justice. Lily tried her absolute hardest not to read the trashy articles, but sometimes she accidentally caught glimpses of them in the grocery store checkout aisles. Her own exhausted face staring back at her from the glossy covers under cruel, speculative headlines. Edward fiercely shielded her from the chaos as much as he humanly could, flatly refusing all media interviews and massively tightening their private security detail. He's incredibly desperate, Lily, Edward told her softly one night as they walked arm in arm through the quiet, moonlit garden to clear their heads. He legally knows that if he loses this highly publicized defamation case, his career, his freedom, and his entire reputation are permanently over. He's a cornered animal. Lily exhaled a shaky, tired breath into the cold night air. He really should have thought about the consequences of that before he callously set out to ruin my life and abandon his children. When the highly anticipated court date finally arrived, the sprawling courtroom was absolutely packed to the brim with eager press, sketch artists, and financial bloggers. Cole walked confidently through the double doors wearing his usual, impenetrable armor. A perfectly custom-tailored dark suit and a smug, arrogant smile for the flashing cameras. But as he sat down at the plaintiff's table, up close, Lily could finally see the massive, undeniable cracks in his facade. His arrogant eyes were deeply bloodshot from lack of sleep. His hands shook slightly as he poured water, and his expensive silk tie was tied just slightly, noticeably crooked. The trial began with fireworks. Cole's sleazy lead attorney painted a dramatic, tragic picture of terrible spousal betrayal, claiming loudly to the jury that Lily had maliciously doctored complex financial statements out of pure, unadulterated vengeance for being left for a younger, prettier model. They repeatedly called her emotionally unstable, deeply vindictive, and psychotically obsessed with ruining a great man's life. It was the exact same tired, misogynistic narrative he had used during the divorce. Only now, in front of a smart jury, it fell completely flat. When it was finally Maya's turn to present the defense, she absolutely destroyed him. She called their very first surprise witness to the stand, a nervous, guilt-ridden former senior accountant from Ardent Solutions. Under oath, the accountant explicitly testified that Cole had personally, verbally ordered him to falsify the corporate ledgers to massively inflate the company's value to trick investors right before the IPO. The packed courtroom murmured loudly in shock. Then, delivering the fatal blow, Maya confidently played a recovered audio recording to the jury. Cole's distinct, arrogant voice was unmistakable as it echoed through the silent courtroom, sneering into a phone call. No one in the feds is ever going to be able to trace that offshore money. Just sign the damn papers. My stupid wife is way too naive and basic to ever understand complex numbers anyway, so leave the files at the house. Cole's face instantly drained of all human color, turning a sickly, ghostly white. The stern judge raised a highly skeptical eyebrow, leaning over the bench. Mr. Mercer, is that your voice on the recording admitting to federal wire fraud? Cole's panicked lawyer jumped up and stammered weakly. Objection. Your Honor. Relevance. Overruled, the judge said sharply, banging his gavel. Sit down, counselor. The rest of the highly publicized trial was just meaningless background noise. The mountain of digital and financial evidence Maya presented was absolutely overwhelming and undeniable. The global financial media aggressively spun the trial as the Mercer meltdown. Frightened, Angry investors began rapidly withdrawing millions of dollars in capital from his funds. Sloan Rivers literally vanished from the courtroom, hallway halfway through the second day of testimony. Her phone buzzing nonstop with frantic messages from fashion brands officially cutting ties with her due to the toxic association. When the final judicial ruling came down from the bench a week later, it was swift, brutal, and absolute. Cole Mercer's ridiculous defamation claim was entirely dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, the furious judge ordered him to personally pay all of Lily's exorbitant legal fees, and mandated that he issue a formal, public apology in print within 7 days, or face severe contempt charges. Outside the grand steps of the courthouse, the frantic reporters swarmed Lily once again, shoving microphones in her face. One aggressive journalist shouted over the crowd, "Mrs. Langley, after completely destroying his empire, do you finally feel vindicated?" Lily paused at the very top of the marble courthouse steps, the wind blowing her hair, looking down at the sea of cameras. "I don't need public vindication from him, or from anyone else," she said, her voice carrying with incredible, serene power. "I just needed the world to hear the truth." Her powerful words aired live on every single major news network in the world. Even the cynical, hardened news anchors went completely quiet for a respectful moment after the clip played. Later that evening, as the massive city glowed peacefully beneath their penthouse window, Edward quietly poured her a celebratory glass of expensive red wine. "It's finally over," he said, handing her the crystal glass. Lily looked at him, her voice incredibly soft but steady. "No, Edward, it's not over yet. He will publish that forced apology. But not because he's actually sorry for what he did to me and the babies. He'll do it because the world finally put a gun to his head and made him." Exactly a week later, the Wall Street Journal begrudgingly published a legally mandated, half-page statement from Cole Mercer. "I publicly apologize to Ms. Lily Hart Langley for my false, defamatory claims and my past unacceptable conduct. She acted with absolute integrity at all times. I did not." Lily read the black and white print once, folded the newspaper neatly, and whispered to herself, "That is the only signature of his I will ever keep." And for the first time in years, she felt completely, truly, undeniably free. By early June, the harsh concrete of Manhattan had softened beautifully beneath the warm, golden glow of summer. The sprawling city that had once aggressively tried to devour Lily whole now seemed to bow respectfully to her at every turn. Major lifestyle magazines published glowing feature pieces praising her for her incredible grace and resilience. Respected journalists universally called her the remarkable woman who fiercely rebuilt her own legend from the ashes. And massive streaming platforms were already engaged in a bidding war, aggressively requesting exclusive rights to fund and distribute her upcoming documentary project. But for the very first time in her life, Lily truly didn't care about the loud noise, the fame, or the accolades. She just wanted absolute peace. Edward, knowing her heart better than anyone, noticed her exhaustion before she even had to say a single word. "We are leaving the city for a while," he told her firmly one sunny morning at breakfast, casually sliding a folded, handwritten itinerary across the marble kitchen table. "We are taking a full week at the beach house in the Hamptons. No press. Absolutely no business meetings, no cell phones. Just you, me, and the kids." Lily smiled softly, tracing the edge of the paper. "Do workaholic billionaires actually ever take real vacations?" "Only when someone they love deeply reminds them that they need to," he said, reaching across the table and kissing her hand. The sprawling, historic Langley family beach house sat on a highly private, incredibly quiet stretch of pristine sand in East Hampton, completely surrounded by rolling, grassy dunes and massive bushes of fragrant white roses. The salty ocean air smelled perfectly like freedom and warm sunlight. The dark blue ocean stretched out endlessly beyond the horizon, whispering ancient, calming secrets that the loud, frantic city of Manhattan would never, ever understand. The very first night there, Lily stood happily barefoot in the cool, wet sand, wearing a comfortable, oversized sweater. Watching the energetic triplets toddle clumsily along the foamy shore, their pure, innocent laughter instantly swallowed by the ocean wind. Edward stood nearby, grilling fresh seafood on the wooden patio. His expensive dress shirt sleeves rolled up casually, the warm, flickering firelight painting his handsome face in shades of gold. For the very first time in what felt like 100 years, she didn't feel watched, judged, or hunted by the world. She just felt gloriously, beautifully human again. Over a quiet, candlelit dinner on the deck, they spoke only about small, wonderful things. Eli's sudden, intense fascination with collecting broken seashells. Grace's fierce, adorable stubbornness when she didn't want to eat her vegetables. Noah's hilarious, wide-eyed obsession with watching the seagulls dive for fish. It was incredibly simple, profoundly ordinary, and yet, to Lily, sitting there listening to the waves, it felt like absolute, undeniable magic. When the exhausted babies were finally asleep in their cribs upstairs, Edward opened a vintage bottle of red wine and poured 2 large glasses. They sat closely together on the wooden deck, the rhythmic, soothing sound of the dark waves lapping gently against the wooden pilings of the pier. "You know," Edward said quietly, looking out at the dark water, "when I first met you on that awful freezing bus, I honestly thought you were made entirely of fragile glass. Beautiful, but incredibly easy to break." Lily raised a skeptical, amused eyebrow, taking a sip of wine. "Well, that is not exactly a very flattering compliment, Mr. Langley." He smiled, turning to look deeply into her eyes. "I was completely, entirely wrong about you. You aren't made of glass, Lily. You are made of forged steel, wrapped beautifully in soft silk. You might bend in the hurricane, but you absolutely never, ever break." She laughed softly, shaking her head, a stray tear of happiness catching in her eyelashes. "I really had no other choice, Edward. If I allowed myself to break, the world would have happily drowned me and my children." Edward's intense, loving gaze lingered on her face in the moonlight. "You aren't fighting for your life anymore, Lily. The war is over. You are finally building your life." For a long, beautiful moment, a comfortable, warm silence stretched peacefully between them. The bright, silver moonlight danced magically across the dark water, reflecting brightly like millions of scattered, floating diamonds. The next morning, she woke up early, long before the sun, and quietly brewed a pot of fresh coffee while the entire house still slept. She stepped outside onto the chilly deck with her warm mug, the salty ocean breeze gently brushing her dark hair. From her pocket, her cell phone buzzed with a sudden notification. It was an urgent, highly flagged email from the New York Times. "Dear Mrs. Langley, we would be absolutely honored to feature you on the cover of our upcoming Women Who Redefine Success global series." Lily smiled a faint, knowing smile, but she didn't reply to the prestigious offer. Without a second thought, she calmly deleted the email. Instead, she opened her camera app and took a simple, beautiful, unedited picture of the breathtaking, pink sunrise over the ocean to send privately to Maya. Her simple text caption read, "Finally breathing." Later that same lazy afternoon, Ben Walker, her old, trusted television mentor, called her excitedly from his office in Los Angeles. "Lily, I saw the incredible news coverage. The documentary pitch you sent me. Netflix absolutely loved it. They want to buy it. And they want you officially listed as the lead executive producer for the entire series." Her hand froze midair, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Me? As the executive producer? Not just a creative consultant?" "No. Lily. You. You are running the show. It's your amazing story now. And you own every single piece of it." When she finally hung up the phone, hot, joyful tears welled up in her eyes and spilled over her cheeks. She turned toward the bright, sparkling water where Edward was happily playing in the shallow waves with the laughing children, splashing water and chasing them through the sand. She realized in that exact, perfect moment that true, Lasting success didn't actually feel like loud applause, viral headlines, or massive bank accounts. It felt exactly like this. The taste of ocean salt on her lips, the sound of pure, unburdened laughter in the air, and a profound, deep peace she hadn't even known she was desperately searching for. That peaceful evening, they ate a quiet dinner under the fading, purple sky. Lily watched the spectacular sunset burn bright orange, red, and pink over the vast ocean, her heart completely, wonderfully full. "Do you know what I really want to do next?" she asked softly, swirling her wine glass. Edward looked up from his plate, his eyes soft and attentive. "What do you want to do?" "My love, I want to build a foundation," she said, her voice filled with newfound, absolute purpose. "A massive, fully funded foundation specifically for at-risk single mothers. We'll offer them real, tangible help, free housing, free higher education, and free, safe child care. Something that actually, permanently changes lives. Not just something that generates good PR headlines for rich people." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his eyes shining with immense pride. "Then we will build it together. Whatever you need, it's yours." Lily smiled brightly, the warm ocean wind tangling her hair around her face. "It's so strange to think about," she whispered, looking at the crashing waves. "For so long, the burning desire for revenge and justice was the only thing that kept me alive and fighting. And now, none of it matters to me anymore. I just don't care about him." Edward brushed his thumb gently over her knuckles. "That, Lily, is exactly how you know you have truly, finally won the war." As the dark, starry night fell peacefully over the Hamptons, the rhythmic, crashing waves whispered against the shore like the sound of a gentle, eternal applause, carrying away every last, lingering echo of her old, agonizing pain. For the very first time in years, Lily wasn't just surviving the day. She wasn't fighting a war, and she wasn't trying to prove her worth to anyone. She was simply beautifully, entirely free. September brought incredibly crisp, cool air and a profound, electric sense of change to the city. Manhattan glittered brilliantly under its famous autumn lights, but this time, Lily wasn't returning to the concrete jungle to desperately chase her survival. She was returning to confidently lead. Her highly anticipated, groundbreaking documentary series, The Mothers Who Stayed, was officially premiering at the prestigious Metropolitan Cultural Center. The film powerfully, unflinchingly told the raw, beautiful stories of diverse women who absolutely refused to break under the weight of systemic abandonment and poverty, narrated not by famous Hollywood actors, but entirely by the brave survivors themselves. For the very first time in her public life, Lily wasn't the tragic, whispered-about subject of a tabloid story. She was the powerful, respected storyteller holding the pen. The massive red carpet outside the Grand Theater buzzed frantically with hundreds of cameras and reporters. Though this time, the blinding flashes of light felt entirely different to her. The press wasn't aggressively hunting for a juicy, embarrassing scandal. They were respectfully, loudly celebrating her strength and her art. Edward gently, lovingly adjusted her silk shawl around her shoulders before they stepped out of the tinted town car into the bright lights. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly, his eyes full of love. Lily smiled a radiant, fearless smile. "I have been ready for this moment my entire life, Edward. I just didn't know it until now." Inside the grand, vaulted theater, the massive crowd was a beautiful, eclectic blend of high elegance and raw, human emotion. Harsh film critics, seasoned journalists, and passionate grassroots activists. Absolutely everyone wanted to see the remarkable woman who had successfully turned a humiliating, public heartbreak into a massive, world-changing purpose. The heavy theater lights dimmed slowly to black, and the very first, poignant scene flickered brightly onto the giant screen. It was a moving, powerful montage of exhausted single mothers gently rocking crying babies in the dark, clocking in exhausted at late-night diner jobs. and lovingly reading worn bedtime stories to their children under flickering, cheap apartment lamps. Then came Lily's strong, steady voiceover filling the silent theater. The world told us that we were permanently broken. They threw us away, but they forgot one crucial thing. Broken things do not simply vanish into thin air. They stay, they fight, and they rebuild themselves to be infinitely stronger than before. The packed audience was dead, completely silent. In the darkness, hundreds of people discreetly wiped tears from their eyes. When the final credits finally rolled up the screen to a swelling, emotional score, the entire room erupted instantly into a deafening, tearful, standing ovation. Cameras flashed brightly in the dark. Lily's eyes glistened with overwhelming, happy tears as she stood up and tightly held Edward's hand. "You did it," he whispered proudly into her ear over the roaring applause. "You really did it." But, hidden in the shadows, not absolutely everyone was clapping for her triumph. At the very back of the dark, crowded hall, half hidden cowardly behind the heavy velvet exit curtains, stood Cole Mercer. His once handsome face looked drastically older, deeply haggard and pale. The sharp, insufferable arrogance that used to define his every move was entirely replaced by a crushing, hollow exhaustion. The massive fraud scandal, the endless federal lawsuits, the frozen bank assets. The public disgrace, absolutely everything he had done had finally, violently caught up with him. Sloan had ruthlessly sold a highly lucrative, scathing tell-all interview to a major network months ago, taking whatever money was left and leaving him entirely, publicly humiliated and alone. He was a ruined man, stripped entirely bare of his power and his pride. When the massive crowd finally began to clear out of the theater for the reception, Lily spotted him and found him waiting nervously near the back exit, his shaking hands shoved deep into his cheap coat pockets. "You really shouldn't be here, Cole," she said quietly, her voice devoid of anger, feeling only a profound, distant pity. "I know," he admitted, looking down at his scuffed shoes, unable to meet her eyes. "But I needed to see it for myself. I needed to see exactly what you became without me." "I became exactly the woman you actively tried to destroy," she said simply, her tone unshakable. He nodded slowly, a deep, agonizing shame flickering visibly across his tired face. "I entirely deserved that, for what it's worth to you now. I watched your film. It is incredibly beautiful, Lily." Lily's throat tightened slightly in surprise. "You actually watched it?" "Yeah," he said softly, a single tear pooling in his eye. "You showed the world exactly what I was always too blind and stupid to ever understand. Real, true strength doesn't need to steal a spotlight to exist." He hesitated, his eyes remaining downcast in defeat. "The federal prosecutors officially offered me a plea settlement deal today. If I agreed to turn over all the hard evidence on the corrupt corporate board members who helped me cover up the offshore fraud. I took the deal. Lily, I did it. I am testifying in federal court tomorrow morning. I am going to prison, and I will lose absolutely everything I have left. But maybe it's finally time I did." For the very first time since she had met him, she actually, truly believed him. Not because he sounded particularly sorry for the pain he caused her, but because, stripped of his wealth and his ego, he finally looked human again, fragile, incredibly small, and terribly real. "Good," she said quietly, offering him no absolution, but no further venom either. "You cannot ever undo the horrific pain of the past, Cole, but you can at least stop repeating it for the future." He smiled a deeply sad, broken smile. "And you, Lily? You finally found the one thing in this world I never, ever had. Peace." She took a deep, full breath, feeling incredibly steady, grounded, and perfectly calm. "I found myself, Cole, and that was more than enough." Before he turned to walk out the door and face his grim future, Cole hesitated and handed her a small, unmarked white envelope. It's a small trust for the kids. A college fund I managed to hide legally before the asset freeze. No names attached. No PR headlines, no strings. Please, just don't ever tell them where the money came from. Lily hesitated for a long moment, looking at the envelope, then slowly accepted it from his trembling hand. She didn't take it to forgive him, but she took it for the innocent children who would thankfully never have to know the dark, terrifying chaos their biological father had once caused. "Goodbye, Cole," she said softly. "Goodbye, Lily," he whispered back. And for once in their entire tragic history, there was absolutely no venom, no petty bitterness, no manipulation, only a heavy final, an absolute silence as he walked out the door and disappeared into the New York night. Later that evening, at the lavish, joyful post-premiere gala, eager journalists surrounded Lily once again, microphones raised. "Mrs. Langley," one reporter asked eagerly, "what is the ultimate, final message you want your incredible film to send to the world tonight?" She looked directly, fearlessly into the glowing camera lens, her voice perfectly steady and ringing with truth. That women do not ever need a hero to come along and save them. They just need the world to finally open its eyes and see them for who they really are. Deafening applause rippled excitedly through the crowded room. Edward watched her proudly from across the hall, immense love and deep respect softening his handsome features. Outside the warm room, the massive Manhattan skyline shimmered brilliantly against the pitch-black night sky. Somewhere far in the distance, a police cruiser's siren wailed as it drove past. The massive, chaotic world kept moving forward, as restless and indifferent as ever. But inside Lily's healed, beating heart, there was only a profound, beautiful stillness. For the very first time in her entire life, obtaining justice didn't taste bitter like revenge. It tasted exactly like peace. Winter returned to Manhattan very softly that year, beautifully covering the loud, dirty city in a thick blanket of quiet, pristine snow instead of its usual frantic chaos. The grand Langley townhouse on the Upper East Side glowed warmly with golden light, the joyful sound of pure, uninhibited laughter echoing brightly through its historic halls. 3 energetic toddlers, Noah, Grace, and Eli, raced wildly across the polished hardwood floors, leaving chaotic, happy trails of plastic toy cars, discarded wrapping paper, and loud giggles in their wake. Lily stood happily by the large bay window, a warm mug of coffee in her hand, watching her children playfully tumble onto a massive pile of velvet pillows right beside the crackling, roaring fireplace. It was their 3rd birthday. The elegant, formal living room had been lovingly transformed into a chaotic, messy, wonderful small wonderland. There were dozens of pale blue and silver balloons floating near the ceiling, colorful ribbons strung across the doorways, and a massive, delicious chocolate cake shaped beautifully like 3 tiny, golden crowns sitting on the dining table. It was nothing overly extravagant, nothing ridiculous that would ever make a tabloid headline. It was just family, pure laughter, and deep, unshakable peace. Charlotte entered the room carrying several large, brightly colored gift bags. "They are absolutely, terribly spoiled already," she said, setting the heavy bags down on the floor with a theatrical, mock groan. Lily smiled brightly, her eyes crinkling. "They entirely deserve to be spoiled today. Charlotte, they were born fighting for their lives." From the massive kitchen down the hall, Edward's deep, warm voice floated happily through the open door. "So was their incredibly brave mother." Lily turned toward the sound, a massive, overwhelming warmth filling her chest to bursting. He walked into the room wearing a casual, flour-dusted apron over his clothes, proudly holding a hot, fresh tray of slightly misshapen homemade chocolate chip cookies. "You are supposed to be a ruthless, intimidating corporate billionaire," she teased him playfully, stealing a cookie from the tray, not a domestic, suburban baker. He grinned a wide, boyish grin that reached his eyes. "Even ruthless billionaires have to earn their keep in this house, Mrs. Langley." Maya arrived at the front door next, shaking the snow off her coat, holding a beautifully wrapped gift and wearing a massive, proud grin. "Just look at this incredible empire you have built, Lils," Maya said, taking off her scarf and looking around the happy room. 3 beautiful, healthy triplets, a handsome billionaire husband who actually cooks, and a sense of deep peace that actually lasts. I guess absolute miracles really do exist in this city. Lily laughed out loud, pulling her best friend into a tight, warm hug. Miracles? Or just the natural consequences of karma that finally, thankfully ran their course? They shared a quiet, deeply knowing look, silently remembering absolutely everything terrible and terrifying it had taken to get them here to this happy room. The freezing, dark courtrooms, the crushing, lonely heartbreak, the agonizing fear, and the ultimate, beautiful rebirth. Outside the window, thick, heavy snow drifted peacefully down over the sprawling city that had once tried to bury her alive, but had now beautifully, permanently become hers to conquer. Later that quiet evening, long after the party guests had gone home and the exhausted children were fast asleep in their beds, Lily and Edward sat closely together on the rug by the dying fire. He reached into his pocket and handed her a very small, velvet box wrapped delicately in a white silk ribbon. "Another birthday gift?" she asked, looking at him with a soft, questioning smile. "You already gave me absolutely everything I could ever want or need in this life, Edward." "Not this," he said, his deep voice incredibly gentle and full of emotion. She carefully untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside rested a stunning, delicate vintage silver locket. She opened the clasp, and inside, beautifully and intricately engraved into the metal, were 4 simple initials, L.N.G. Lily Noah Grace Edward. "When the children are much older," he said softly, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, "I want them to look at this and know exactly who you were before all this wealth and peace. I want them to know the fierce, brave woman who fought a war for them entirely alone, long before she ever had anyone standing beside her to fight with." Hot, happy tears welled up instantly in her eyes, blurring her vision. "You always make me sound so heroic, Edward." "Because you are heroic, Lily," he said simply, kissing away a tear from her cheek. They sat together in comfortable, loving silence for a long moment, watching the orange fire crackle and pop in the hearth. Lily gently traced the deep engraving on the silver locket with her thumb, feeling the weight of her journey. "Do you ever stop and think about what would have happened to me if that specific, late-night city bus never hit a pothole and broke down?" she asked softly, leaning her head against his chest. Edward smiled, resting his chin on the top of her head. "If that hadn't happened, then I would still just be a miserable, lonely man who thought kindness was just an empty, meaningless word, and you would probably still be walking alone through the freezing rain, trying to convince yourself that you had to survive the entire world by yourself." She leaned deeper against him, closing her eyes and listening to the steady, comforting rhythm of his heartbeat. "It's so incredibly funny how the worst, most agonizing pain in your life always seems to lead you exactly where you're ultimately meant to go." He kissed her forehead tenderly in the firelight. "That, my love, is the beautiful thing about surviving the storm. Surviving is never the end of the story. It's just the beginning." As the warm firelight danced across the walls of their home, Lily felt something so profound and absolute that she hadn't felt in years. Complete, unshakable, permanent stillness. She wasn't anxiously waiting for the next inevitable disaster to strike, and she wasn't plotting her next move for revenge. She was simply, beautifully living in the deep peace she had built entirely with her own 2 bruised, exhausted hands. Miles across town, in a quiet, sterile, extremely modest apartment completely stripped of all its former luxury and grandeur, Cole Mercer sat completely alone in the dark on a cheap couch. He was staring blankly at a small, framed, clipped newspaper photo of the growing triplets that he had carefully cut out from a recent media feature. His once steady, arrogant hands trembled violently as he gently touched the glass of the frame and whispered into the suffocating, deafening silence of the empty room, "Happy birthday, kids." There were absolutely no flashing cameras left to capture his sorrow. There was no adoring audience left to manipulate. There was just the cold, haunting, endless echo of absolutely everything beautiful and real that he had foolishly, permanently lost. Meanwhile, back at the warm, glowing Langley home, Lily quietly tiptoed into the darkened nursery before going to bed. The triplets slept incredibly soundly in their beds, their soft, round cheeks flushed pink with sleep, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect, peaceful rhythm. She gently brushed a stray, dark curl away from Grace's warm forehead, pulled the soft blanket up over Noah's shoulders, and whispered softly into the quiet room, "You're safe now, my loves. You are finally home." She lingered in the doorway for a long, beautiful moment, watching them breathe, then quietly turned off the small night light. Downstairs in the living room, Edward waited for her by the large window. Outside the glass, the massive, sprawling Manhattan skyline shimmered and twinkled brightly beneath the endlessly falling, pristine snow. He wrapped his strong arm lovingly around her waist as she joined him at the window, pulling her close against his side. "Is absolutely everything okay?" he asked softly, looking down at her. She smiled a soft, radiant, completely unburdened smile, resting her head on his shoulder. "It is so much more than just okay, Edward." And as the quiet, peaceful snow continued to fall gently over the massive city that had once aggressively tried to break her into a million pieces, Lily Hart Langley finally, truly understood what it meant to win the war. She didn't win by exacting brutal, bloody revenge on her enemies. And she didn't win by chasing shallow, empty headlines. She won by fiercely choosing her own peace, by fiercely choosing true love, and by bravely building a beautiful, lasting legacy that no one could ever tear down again. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Lily's incredible journey. If you are still here, reading or listening to this exact moment, it means that something deep inside this story touched your heart in a profound way that you might not even be able to fully explain. And maybe, just maybe, Lily's incredible journey reminded you of your own hidden, unshakable strength. Life is rarely easy. It often brings us crushing betrayal, agonizing pain, and terrifying moments when we feel completely and utterly abandoned by the people who were supposed to love us the most. But as the great Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wisely said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find true strength." Lily's beautiful, harrowing journey shows us that no matter how incredibly cruel or unfair the world can be, we are absolutely never powerless. We can always choose to rise. We can choose to heal. And we can absolutely turn our deepest, most painful wounds into the very source of our greatest courage and our ultimate success. So tonight, let this story serve as a gentle, powerful reminder to you. You are infinitely stronger than the dark storms that try to break you. You absolutely deserve true love, unwavering dignity, and a beautiful future that is infinitely brighter than your darkest past. If this story moved you, if it brought you comfort or inspired you to keep fighting your own battles, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone in your life who might really need a message of hope today, and please subscribe to our channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories to entertain you, we tell stories that remind us all how to keep going, how to heal, and how to beautifully, triumphantly rise. Thank you for being here, and we will see you in the next story.